What is up, everyone? We're live now, bringing you another interview. But beforehand, if you're new here, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And also, if you don't like taking man's word over God's word, you came to the right place, because we're not like that Mike Jones. So, so we have a Converse Contender here. I was on his stream last week. We were talking about the Nephilim. I think I mispronounced that, and morality, whether it's deontological or should be more utilitarian. You're in what you do.
So basically, I had a YouTube channel about 4 years ago, and I was on G Plus, arguing with non-believers and talking with believers all the time. Man versus the world streams and a lot of the Christian hangouts that we had, and I debated a few atheists back then that were pretty well known. That's so far back that Scholar Fiction, when I debated him, he was a deist and not an agnostic or atheist, whatever he is now. So since I came back, basically what I did was, before I flew out to Hawaii this year, I decided, I'm going to start back a YouTube channel. And basically, when I got back, I called I set up a debate with Jim Majors on the Trinity. Then I set up a debate with Tom Jump on the definition of atheism, and then I started having live streams. And I'm not trying to get popular. I mean, I picked up about 100 subs in like 2 months, so I'm happy with that. And basically, I'm just out there dispelling a lot of the myths, because my main thing is that there are so many misunderstandings in apologetics, not on the Christian side, not just on the Christian side, but also about our arguments from the other side as well. So interesting.
Everyone go subscribe right now, by the way. The link is in the description. Go subscribe to Converse Contender. So what do you think are your most controversial views? Could be on anything, but
Most controversial views. Well, if you mean I guess being a Molinist is pretty controversial. I mean, a lot of Christians just despise the term. Also, atheists seem to not care for it too much. So, but I mean, if you mean controversial, like gets a dig out of people, I mean, is that what you're going for? Or?
So maybe a controversial belief. Obviously, Molinism is controversial with those Calvinists, because they're hostile towards people who aren't Calvinists most of the time. But like James White, me and Stelman talked about this debate. Well, he talked about it, where this guy was like, "Here, drink this bleach," and he was so humble in that debate. I was like, had mad respect for Dr. White, because I would have, in my closing, I would have probably made a few trollish remarks like I usually do with some people. But when it comes to Molinism, the reformers, or people who follow James White, they're just more hostile towards us than atheists, and to me that doesn't make sense. Because if you're going to be an apologist, you should be gentle and respectful, especially towards Christians, but non-believers as well. But so that's a controversial belief you have in some theological camps. What do you think is more controversial in the debate of non-believers?
Probably my most controversial is the Nephilim, because matter of the fact, I had for some reason, non-believers seem to like me a lot, and so since I've been back, and I'm not sure exactly why, but when I had a non-believer actually they were after my debate with Scholar Fiction, where I mentioned the Nephilim and kind of brought out some of the passages, and then the after show, I had a non-believer come on my Discord and in the comments of my YouTube video on that say, "You really believe there was a race of giants back then, blah, blah, blah?" And they were like, "I'm not having conversations with you anymore because you're a fool." But what I
think I know who that was.
Yeah, but what I thought was very interesting was, it was like all the non-believers, atheists, were coming to my defense, like, No, wait. So hang on a second, because you have some beliefs that a lot of people think are pretty backwards and silly. So, and so I thought, hey, that's pretty cool. But I'd say even amongst Christians and non-believers, that view seems to be, people are very skeptical about it. And it seems to be controversial because of the claims that are made. So, but I reading scripture, I don't see another way around it. So, and actually, I'll mention this because you mentioned IP. IP and I are going to be having a conversation on this. It may be a couple months because he has a lot going on right now. But we talked about having like maybe a debate on modern day debate about it. So because we take different views.
Oh, so did you watch his Nephilim video that recently came out?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it yet. What is it like? What's his main premise? Probably something from John Walton, Michael Heiser.
So his main premise is that he disagrees with Michael Heiser, and he takes the view that the sons of God are basically rulers. So they're basically like old kings that and he gives arguments for it. I just don't think they work. Then he gave arguments against for example, the Nephilim and being mixed hybrids and things like that. So but again, I can go through them point by point, and I disagree with them, and I can show him why he's mistaken on a lot of them. So,
did you see the video I put up on? I did a live Q&A with Ted Wright. He's an archaeologist. Good blog at epicarchaeology.org. But he sort of describes it as describing their sort of attitude and so on, and the way they would describe it. I don't quite remember his main argument, but that was a view I took for a little while. I think I could probably agree with IP, but like I said before, I need to do more research into it.
Yeah, sure. I would just say if you take that view, then you have to, number one, you have to ignore all of the Near Eastern background. You have to ignore all of the other cultures that surround them that have the exact same story, but in different terms. Like, for example, there's an extremely close parallel to a Sumerian literature called the Apkallu, which are the sons of God, basically in another story. But also, the other thing I would say is like, well, what is Jude and Second Peter talking about? The angels that sinned, that kept not their first estate, like their first dwelling place, but sinned against God and are locked in chains till the end, and then they're compared to all these sexual sins. Like, both passages compare them to Sodom and Gomorrah. Both passages mention the flood. It just so happens that all of men's hearts were wicked, and Genesis chapter 6 starts with this passage about the sons of God having children with the sons of Adam, mankind. And so there are problems in that, but yeah, I understand there's ways to take that view.
Like I said, I would have to look more into all the passages and so on, because I haven't done a full exegesis on them. Are you a theistic evolutionist? Or are you sort of in the old Earth or young Earth camp?
I would say that I am a theistic evolutionist, yes. But I would partially plead ignorance, because I would just say, like, I don't know that much about biology and such. Stillman looked like he didn't care for that answer, but okay. I would just say that I don't know that much about biology, and so I would just, a lot of times I'll take the general consensus on science, but I have heard a lot of interesting arguments against evolution that I think, for example, adaptations that are beneficial would be a decent argument. And like, I'll give you another one. Like, say that at some point in the past we had wings and now we don't have wings. It seems like that would be something that, like, how could that be something that you would want to lose, for example? So, I mean, I'm not saying that's a solid, like that's secure 100%. I'm just saying there are arguments like that I believe are interesting. But then again, some of the arguments I hear from the young earth side, well, there's a tree found through millions of years of rock or whatever. I mean, obviously there are other explanations for that than it grew up through those. Maybe like there was a catastrophe or something. Like,
well, they want to say the flood caused those to go through the rock layers, something like that. Because I used to use those types of arguments as well.
Sure.
Until I did a good exegesis of Genesis 1, but
Right. Yep.
Not one stone, but
Well, it has nothing to do with the biblical exegesis of Genesis. It has to do with the science. Doesn't matter what Genesis teaches.
So,
no, if you take a literal, sorry, I just have to correct him. If you take a literal 6-day approach and then add up the generations and so on from the literal standpoint that Kent Hovind and G-Man and people like him do, then yeah, it does matter about the exegesis.
Nope.
And cultural context.
No, because I'm saying regardless of what the Bible teaches about the age of the earth, the claim is that the rock layers can't be millions of years old if there was a petrified dead tree standing up through them. And I'm not saying I agree with the argument. I'm
talking about with like young earth creationism in general.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Just if I could add.
I mean, it's
not that this is necessarily where you guys were going, but it sounded like it could have been going there, which is I don't want to set up the dichotomy that either you have to be a young earth creationist or a theistic evolutionist. Obviously, there's old earth intelligent design camp. Sure.
So maybe that would be that's an interesting distinction. I would just say that. So my position is we should equally look at God's word and God's creation, right? So I believe in the old God's revelation through nature and God's revelation through his word. Now there are things, so I like to stick more towards scripture because there are things in the world that can, like, for example, like you can look at nature and go, well, there's poison oak. So obviously God wanted there, to be poison oak. And then you could say, well, no, that may be because of a fallen world or because God cursed the ground or because, so I typically try to stick to scripture, but I also appreciate looking at the natural world and going, well, look at the creation. Like because my point is that if any science that is true science, no matter if it lines up with whatever verse you want, God created it that way. So I've got to obviously go with what actually occurs in the natural world. And the last point I'd make on this is a point that I've heard a few different people make, Michael Heiser and others, but I like him a lot because I relate to him a lot. But so I know I use him a lot as well as a reference. But I think that God reveals things to people in such a way they could understand them. So, for example, I always give this example. If God were to reveal science to a primitive people, for example, the verse that God has the number of hairs on your head numbered, right? If he were to have told the early Israelites, I have the number of molecules in your DNA strand numbered, it would have not, first of all, they wouldn't even have written it down because they would have been just like, I don't know what God's blabbing about. It wouldn't have made any sense to them. So it's not edifying in the least. So I would just say that I don't look to the early Israelites to find out what is scientific or what is the natural world like.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, well, no, not that you're necessarily. Just what's kind of popping into my head is obviously that, but like for example, like when the Book of Job talks about the Earth being round, it's like if the Bible kind of maybe inadvertently makes a claim like that, it's like, well then we do expect that to line up with what reality actually is like when we study science.
Sure. Actually, I haven't never run this by anybody, but I heard this argument a long time, and when you said that, it made me think about it, and inadvertently. There's a verse in the book of Luke. It's been a long time since I looked at it, but I think it's in the book of Luke where it says, I think it's talking about the day that it says on that day there will be a man in the field and there will be a man asleep in a bed, and I heard a guy try to make that to say that, hey, look, the world's round because it's saying like on one side of the earth there's somebody sleeping and on the other side it's daytime and somebody's in a field. So I never really fleshed that out, but I guess if that's the case, what it's implying, then sure, then it's making an inadvertent scientific claim, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think something like that is maybe stretching it a little bit. But the verse in Job, if I'm remembering it correctly,
I agree.
I think it's something like
the circle of the earth. God sits on the circle of the earth.
It's Isaiah 41:22.
Like as a flat circle, but I think that it's one particularly in Job when it says God inscribes a circle on the face of the earth at the boundaries of light and darkness, and that would only make sense if you're talking about a sphere instead of just a flat circle. So there's certain examples like that.
I'm pretty sure it's Isaiah 41:22 that has that, but my view is that most likely the Israelites did believe in flat Earth, but the Bible isn't meant to be a scientifically revelational book. Because like you were talking about with DNA, they would just be confused while they had to use concrete examples like hair on their heads or the stars in the sky with Abraham and so on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
To explain God's majesty.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's many things, take, for example, you hear, and then God repented that he made mankind. And then later on you read, God is not a man that he should repent. So I think that was used as an anthropomorphic way to explain something, as in God was displeased with what happened, right? And so I think similarly, that's what happens with some of these claims. So,
yeah, I mean, it's important to take each individual one in context. One of the things, what you said earlier, he also said that, God has written two books. He's written the book of the Bible. He's written the book of nature. And so obviously we expect the two to line up. And I think sometimes what people maybe say, maybe the young earther types, or not necessarily, but say Christians who more tend to lean towards the Bible, I think the concern they might have is if the science directly contradicts the Bible, saying, well, God made the science, so it has to be right. And you can look at through, for example, the humans used to think that the sun went around the earth, and if at the time we would have said, well, look, we have to interpret the Bible in light of this, well, we were wrong then. And so even today it's possible for us to be wrong about the science, and so we do have to be careful to not too quickly jump to, say, reinterpret the Bible after every new scientific discovery.
Yeah, sure. I mean, but here, not that I'm a big fan of Ten Bruggencate, but he made a good point about, he said, if you were to take a look at Adam 1 second after he was born, right, and he looked like a fully grown man.
This is an argument I've made. So
how old is he? Well, he looks like he's 40, so science would probably gauge him based on scientific knowledge and background.
Well, that's different. I don't know. If you would have tested his DNA, I don't know what you would have gotten. He also argued you would have been able to tell.
No. That's not what my point was. My point was that if you were to look at his appearance,
just
you would deduce that maybe he was a 30-year-old guy or whatever he looked like, because obviously he was talking to God and walking around and things. But as Cy pointed out, he was 1 second old. There are, for example, there could be the appearance or things like that. And so I think scientists even admit this sometimes when they talk about the appearance of design, but they give tacit approval to it and then reject it in the next breath.
Well, they don't have a good alternative.
Sure.
It's like okay, there's the appearance of design. It's like, okay, what gives rise to the appearance of design? They don't have a good explanation for it. They don't have a naturalistic explanation for the production of new kinds of information. That's one of the problems I have with the theory of macroevolution, is there is no naturalistic mechanism that explains the the arising of new kinds of information. All the naturalistic mechanisms do is they copy it, they degrade it, or they scramble it. Not to sound too much like a young Earth creationist, but
Well,
I'm not a young Earth creationist, but I am an intelligent design theorist, and yeah.
Let me try. I'm not the best defender of evolution, but I think they would maybe say that when DNA, and I'm no biologist, so I can easily get any of this wrong, but when a DNA nucleotide splits, I think new information is with that, and then whenever that new baby of whatever is born, it has a new formity, it has a new thing about it, and over millions of years, these small compilations add up to, different things.
What do you mean specifically about one splitting?
Like, is it RNA or DNA that would split and then add new information?
I don't remember.
Either way, basically the argument would be that
I don't think either one adds.
I don't know how the DNA would do it. Huh?
I don't think either one adds new kinds of information.
I wouldn't know then because I'm not a biologist, but I think some argue that.
Are you talking about amoebas when the amoebas multiply when you got one like this and it kind of does like this?
No, I'm talking about like DNA in general. Like you get an adaptation even in microevolution. I think that macro and micro are just the same thing. I think macro is just over a longer period of time and you get more change over time.
That's the very question. But the discovery of epigenetic information shows they're not the same thing, because epigenetic information is a specific difference from, what would you call it, different body plans. Like microevolution works because all you have to do is you have to mutate the genetic information, and so you can have this kind of variance, but on top of the same body plan. That's like what Darwin observes with the finches. Like you can have different kinds of information in beak sizes, but when it's on top of the same body plan, it doesn't matter. Epigenetic information says they're separate body plans, and you need a different kind of mechanism to bridge that divide with mutations. Natural selection by themselves don't do it.
Well, I'll just say, I'm not a biologist either, and I'm interested, but I have a lot of other things right now that I'm more interested in, obviously. But I have just listened to a good talk by the Hoover Institute, and I mentioned this in another live stream that I did. It's Dr. David Berlinski, Dr. David Galeringer, and Stephen Meyer. They all three were being kind of interviewed about Darwinism because Berlinski wrote a book called Darwin's Doubt. Stephen Meyer wrote Signature in the Cell, and then Galeringer, who
I think Stephen wrote Signature in the Cell and Darwin's Doubt.
Or no, not Darwin's Doubt. The Deniable Darwin was David Berlinski's book. Sorry about that. Thanks for the correction. So, but David Galeringer, I believe he's an atheist, but he's he's a cutting edge scientist in computer. I don't remember what the specific field was, like computer technology or something. But anyway, so he became convinced by Stephen Meyer's book Signature in the Cell, and all of his atheist friends at the big universities are like, what? And he wrote a paper about it, and so they were all interviewed on it, and they all kind of interacted with the material, and I thought it was very interesting because while I might accept evolution as being the case, I don't accept that the Darwinian view is 100% correct. I mean, there's so much that I don't know about Evo-Devo research and about all the other branches of evolution research that, I'm kind of in the dark. So when I like to listen to conversations like those that kind of give you some insights into why people are doubting a specific type of evolution, like a specific pool of evolution, for example. And so I would definitely, on this topic, if you guys are interested, I'd definitely check that out.
Yeah, no, I saw the beginning of it. I didn't see the whole thing. What seems to be definitely the case is that Darwin is dead. The theory of Darwinian evolution, that's done. That's not supported by any science. No one can handle that anymore. Even people who are committed atheists and who are committed to the theory of evolution are looking for new mechanisms because they realize that natural selection and random mutations can't do it by themselves. You have some people going for what's called evolution 2.0. They're looking for different theories of evolution. People always get mad at me when I say it. They're like, well, there's the minority of people. The majority still accept Darwinian evolution. I'm like, yeah, I don't care. That's not why they're having these meetings at like these scientific communities. And it does seem like if macroevolution has a fighting chance, the future for it is process structuralism. It is some kind of set way of saying it's goal directed by an intelligent cause. So I still don't buy it. I still think when you kind of back the process structuralists into a corner, they end up just affirming modified view of intelligent design. But if macroevolution has a chance, has a future, it's going to be in some kind of coupled with intelligent design.
Now, you're an older Earth creationist, right? Or are you I don't know how old your Earth is?
So right now I just.
I was asking Stelman.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. I was asking him because
I thought because you guys are best friends that you would have already known his view.
Who said we're best friends?
I know. I'm just messing.
Why would I be friends?
By best friends, I mean like enemies.
Yeah,
no, we're friends, but you know.
I don't feel comfortable talking about it just because I don't like the fact that so many Christians divide over it. I feel like we should come together on what we agree on and not divide over the things we disagree on. I have a more controversial position because I lean toward old Earth creationism in this sense. I do kind of affirm the typical 13.8 billion year model, but I'm hardcore on intelligent design. I do think dinosaurs were probably more recently than most people would think. So it's kind of a weird mixture there, and I don't necessarily like to get into the details there, but.
Okay, because I was going to ask, we have, because if you accepted the dating, I don't know if you do now, but if you accepted the dating for like all the different bones and dinosaurs and stuff, then I guess I would have to ask, as an old Earth creationist, how would you explain all the different species and their different periods? Because to me, it would have to be like you have to say that God destroys the dinosaurs and then creates a whole bunch of new ones, and then they all go extinct and then create a whole bunch of new species. And that's the problem I've always had sort of with the old Earth creationist perspective, but maybe there's alternative.
There's two ways to look at it, and I'm going to even be dipping kind of into my young Earth past to kind of pull some of these things. Is number one, even old Earthers, we still believe that there was a Genesis flood. And so that can still play a role when you talk about how that's ordered. And then the second thing I would just point to, and young Earthers say this a lot, and old Earthers don't usually like it, especially the evolutionists, but the idea that these fossils are so neatly organized isn't as true as people like to claim. It's not as set in stone as this layer has these types of body plans of animals and this layer has these types. It's not as neatly organized as they necessarily claim. But yeah, so I'd say I don't know exactly, but
I stumped you.
Yeah.
You should just become a theist. I describe myself as a pragmatic theistic evolutionist. I think it's easily compatible with Scripture. I think the majority of scientists accept it, and I can easily be wrong. So it's more of a probability argument, I guess. You can accuse me of an argument from authority, but I'll use logic.
So I'm fine with an old Earth view as well. I mean, I'm fine with that. So I would just say, see, with your claim about the dinosaurs, I didn't really get necessarily the point of that. I would just say that something like time isn't, a problem for God, for one, and then I would say the other would be something like God developed lower forms of life to a point where he could do something special with Adam, for example.
Well, the old Earth creationists, I don't think they would accept that, over time, all these species change into new species and so on, and populations and, change over a long period of time, of course. It would seem like to me that the dinosaurs had their own period. And then I'm not a zoologist, so I don't have all the periods memorized. But there's if they were to accept all the fossil, if they accept the fossil, how it would be layered with these fossils are at this period in this rock layer strata, and then go on, and then they date the rock layer strata to a certain period, and these bones are found there. and let's say they take a local flood, then my question would be: Is God making a bunch of periods and then He just wipes out these species and then makes a new period? To me, it's not really a big deal, but it would just seem completely
see, and that's why I don't
necessarily
like putting myself into a box.
I think I'm missing the point.
Because for example, when people are old earthers, people tend to assume they believe in a local flood. I don't. I believe in a worldwide flood. So that's why I don't necessarily like putting labels on it, because I do kind of have a mixture of these views. But sorry, I interrupted you.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't. I'm still, I still didn't understand the point that much. I guess that dinosaurs were in a certain era. I'm not sure. Like, I do take a local flood view.
Well, I'm basically asking, did God make all the dinosaurs, then kill them with a meteor, and then create a whole bunch of new species at once?
No. I don't accept your
well, no, I'm not saying old Earth creationism. Every view of it takes that because you have gap theory and stuff.
Right.
I'm simply asking, is there a view in which? Okay, go ahead.
I'm saying put the science aside. I think you can look at dinosaurs through a historical lens, and I think there's good evidence that people lived at the same time as dinosaurs. That's why my view on this is quite unusual.
Well, when you say unusual, are you saying most old Earth creationists don't take your view and they take sort of a Hugh Ross view?
Probably.
Where there are, because it seems like when I read Case for a Creator, it seems like Stephen Meyer and most of them accept that the fossil dating and there are these different periods and so on a different species. And to me, it seems like if you don't accept that things have multiple changes and then over time they develop new species and so on, the whole process of evolution. And it seems like God literally just wipes out the dinosaurs, creates a new species, wipes them out, and keeps going until he gets. And if so, then it just.
Now, hold on, wait. If so,
then
that matter? What? Yeah, if so, then what were you about to say?
Well, firstly, it would seem very odd for Genesis 1 if you're going to take even a long period of time, like how Hugh Ross does. Gap theory, I guess, could get around that because they would say that, there was a gap in between Genesis 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And so maybe most gap theorists accept what I'm saying, and because I know Praise, I think he's still a gap theorist, but I'm not certain because his views change a lot. But basically, they would probably say that, yeah, that's just not mentioned in Genesis 1. We sort of get that through general revelation and special revelation. We get the modern day creation, which is what the 6 days are about and so on. Which, if that's the case, then that can easily solve my question.
Yeah, so on this topic, one thing that I would just, because you solved your own question there, on this topic, what I would say, because I'm not that knowledgeable about biology and all, and about, I would just say something like, I think both views can be correct. I have a friend that I've met through multiple people on here, Standing for Truth, some of his stuff sometimes, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with him, and he takes the young earth view, and obviously he would disagree with me, but so on that point, like I would just I would look more into what does the Bible say, because and so I was just going to recommend a book, John Lennox's book, 7 Days That Divide the Earth, or 7 Days That Divide the World. One of those two is correct, and I think he makes a good point that I've made before about taking a verse literally and literalistically, because if you ask, when Jesus says, I am the door, did he mean that he was a door literally? Well, yeah, he did literally mean that he was a door, right? But in a literalistic way, it would be that he was a piece of plywood, or he was a piece of wood with the handle. And so a lot of times I see that with the young earth creationists, and then they'll say, well, if a child read it, don't you think that they would get what I got out of it? And then, well, yeah, but if a child read Ezekiel, do you think they would understand Ezekiel? I I don't think it seems like that a lot of people think the Bible should be something that children can understand with their first reading, and yet we are all having differences amongst what we're getting out of it, So
I think all the essentials are on a 6th grade reading level.
Sure.
But when it comes to many topics, atheists want to have their piece of cake when they want to say, independent of context or whatever, that the Bible supports slavery, rape, and all these other claims, or the Bible says that unicorns exist. Anything that makes Christianity look stupid. But then whenever we point stuff out that helps our position, they're just like, how do you know what the Bible says? Later over time. So one way, hey, I'm a Bible scholar. I can tell you what the Bible says on these topics to help out my position, and showing how what you theists believe are how you theists believe in Bronze Age goathood or not, superstitious and all that good stuff. But when you use it, you don't know what you're saying because you can't know what it says. So either it has to be a 6th grade level education, or it's not, and it can't be revealed from God at all. It's just a rant from them that I go on, but I see a very common trend between young Earth creationists who typically end up being King James onlyists, and then the same atheists who want every scripture, every verse in the Bible, out of its context to be understandable, or a spot at the 1st grade reading book or whatever. But that's just
even worse than the young earthers always tending to be King James onlyists. They tend to be presuppositionalists, which is even worse. I don't know why. Why this unholy alliance? Why is it? Then that's why I tend more towards the old earthers, because the philosophy that goes with that is just much more sophisticated. I'm a big philosophy guy, so.
You're a theist. You can't love wisdom.
Got me.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the depths of my insights when it comes to biology.
You're the guest. We should shift to a topic you really want to, or you're really good at, or something.
Oh, just ask me whatever questions you guys got, and I'll tell you what my insights are, what I have found from my research and my studying.
Well, John, this is your channel, so you can go first.
What do you think is the best argument for God's existence?
The best argument? Well, that's an interesting question, because I don't take arguments in the same way that a lot of believers do. So I hear a lot that, people tend to take arguments that are either true or false, right? So they'll take something like the ontological argument, which I think certain modal forms of the ontological argument and S5 logic is it's sound and valid, and it follows. But there are always the people who will deny S5 logic, and then you have to go elsewhere. And Ben Arbour pointed this out in my interview with him. But there, you can make the same argument without that logic. But I don't typically take arguments like that. So what I like to do is I like to systematically appeal to the person's reason, because I feel like people reason on a much more local level. So I'll give you an example, and this will kind of clear up what I mean by this long-winded response. So I went down this path with Steve McCrae, and Steve, I like Steve. He's he's a friend, and I said to him, well, Steve, wouldn't you agree with me that evidence means something like? So first, I start with the definition of evidence, so that we can find out, do we have an agreement on that? And I said to him, wouldn't you agree with me that evidence means something like a body of facts, or some fact that lends to the credibility of something being more likely given that fact than without it? So, and then he said, yeah, I agree with that totally. And then he said, I put it in a different way, and he gave it to me, and I said, yeah, I agree with that. It's basically the same exact thing. And I said, okay, so let's take an argument, any of these arguments. I like the fine-tuning argument, or like the argument from order. So I would say something like, if God exists, which is a blasphemous hypothetical, but I just say it for the sake of argument. If God exists, we would expect things to be orderly because they were ordered in such a way by a creator, because he designed things. So when we look at laws, when we look at nature, we see that the natural laws correspond to given mathematical equations and so forth, and the arguments for order in nature. And I say, if God exists, wouldn't it follow that things would be ordered? And Steve said yes. And I said, so given the fact that there is order, doesn't it follow that is evidence for God, whether it's good evidence or weak evidence? And then he said, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it is. And so I got him to that point where I say, okay, you get to this point, now we agree there's evidence for God. And at that point, people who don't want to affirm that therefore God exists, they have to resort to, but there's evidence that atheism exists, or that atheism's true. I'm sorry. For example, the problem of evil, would be an example of that. To which, of course, I think is a very weak argument, because I think the problem of evil is a problem for atheism, because what is evil, right, in atheism? And then we would go down that road into that. But that's how I typically approach the conversation is, I like the fine-tuning argument. I like the ontological argument, but I don't. I think that when you get into those, they go that you always hear something like, "Well, no, hold on, wait. So one premise isn't necessarily true, right?" And then they'll go into the little minutia details where it's like you argue for an hour to get to the point where it's like, "Well, we disagree about the premise." Where I can just do what I just showed you and get to the fact that there's evidence for God.
It's funny, when you said earlier there's evidence that atheism exists, I could just hear atheists all around the world pooping their pants. Like, what? He's an idiot! What a straw man! Holy God!
Well, Pine Creek says there is no good evidence for atheism, but he doesn't define it as an actual worldview system or system that actually really makes any ontological claims.
Well, you don't want to do that because then you have a burden of proof.
Well, that and he just means his own opinion. I'm pretty sure about that, since he argues that what's your confidence level for this argument, and so on and so forth. But that's his street epistemology from how I understand it.
Yeah, and the thing about street epistemology, not to change the conversation, but since you mentioned it, I find that it's sometimes it can be dishonest in the sense that I like that better than the old look at your God in the Bible, Jesus drowned babies argument, right? But still, look, if you look at it, like I see like somebody will say something like, well, how do you get morals with nature? And then they'll go, well, how do you get morals with God? It's like, well, hold on a second, because first of all, like, it just seems like you're avoiding the question to ask me the same question. Like, let's talk about you first, and then, like, I asked you the question, obviously. But, like, they want to get to the point where it's like, well, no, let's see you answer it first. And it just seems like third grade. And then Reed made a good point about this where he said, it's leading the witness, right? It's like in court, you lead the witness where you like want them to go, for example, so that you can get to a certain point where it may not have went that way. So I just don't like it when that's used on people who study nothing about the Bible. They just are nominal Christians. I don't know. It's just hard to watch.
Yeah.
It's like I don't go out looking for atheists who like just, they read a book on Hinduism. They're like, that's pretty cool. But like, they don't know anything about atheist arguments. And I actually had an argument like that one time. I had a debate with the head of an atheist organization, and she hadn't even heard of William Lane Craig or any of the theists, like anything. She hasn't even heard of the multiverse or like any of those arguments. And so at some point I just go, All right. Well, it's nice talking to you. I just go because I just felt bad.
Yeah. Did you see the event in Toronto with Jordan Peterson, Rebecca Goldstein, and William Lane Craig? And Rebecca Goldstein is the atheist, and she goes to great pains to explain in grueling detail the Euthyphro dilemma, as if no one had ever heard of that before, or possibly considered it.
Right.
And William Lane Craig's response, he's like, "I'm really surprised to hear you trot out the old Euthyphro dilemma, because this has been answered over and over." And she's sitting there shaking her head.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to answer it. It's like,
yeah, that was kind of funny.
Well, you read my paper on the Euthyphro dilemma, Stelman. What do you think of my responses?
I thought it was really good. I thought even I did a lengthy video on my channel about it.
Oh,
and
it's okay.
Well, yeah, no, but for example, I didn't even know, like you had brought up that the history wasn't even to challenge theism, like it was to challenge pantheism, right? A pantheon of gods.
It wasn't even to challenge polytheism. It was just sort of the grounding of the pious or the good or the holiness. What they mean by pious, the context is a dialogue between Euthyphro and Socrates. Usually people think Euthyphro, there may be two different dialogues, so I'm not saying this is the only one, but the one I read, if it is the only one that there is, most people do present, and sometimes some apologists present as Euthyphro asking the dilemma to Socrates before his trial. Maybe it's in Last Days of Socrates, but from the book I read, in their dialogue, I forget Euthyphro is talking about some crime, and then they start talking about the good, and then Socrates starts asking him, well, what is piety? And then he goes, well, piety is what the gods will. And then the Euthyphro gets broken out. And is it pious because the gods will it, or do the gods will it because it's pious? And that's how it comes about. And then people take that out of its context and use that against classical theism. Well, it's really an argument against polytheism, because you have a bunch of pantheon of gods that clearly have different opinions and are eternal beings, because you have Kronos who devours his sons, and Zeus eventually, locks him up and so on. Talk about someone with daddy issues, but
right.
It's the analogical reasoning going on isn't good between polytheism and theism when you look at the dilemma from its original context.
Well, yeah, and it's good because it is a crushing dilemma if you have just all these different gods. Like someone could ask how to ground, like if it was us three, and they said, well, how can we possibly ground the good in you three? You three can't even agree on what Scripture teaches, much less what would be absolutely good in every single case. Like, yeah, that's a good argument. And so that was something I learned from it.
So I agree. So I've heard that response before, and I think it's valid. I like to point out in that dilemma that it's not a dilemma, that that obviously that God is the good, right? So, and then I will say something, and then they'll say, well, how or why or what? And then, so I like to put it this way, and I haven't heard anybody put it this way before. So you guys, if I'm wrong at all, I've been challenged a few times, but I haven't been shown to be wrong. So maybe you guys can help me if you think I am. But I like to say things to non-believers like, doesn't it stand to reason that blah, 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 and then I'll give my point, and then I'll let them disagree if they do. So I would say something like, well, doesn't it stand to reason if God is, instead of God, let's call him the creator. The creator created everything. So everything that is in existence is emergent from God. So we will have, let's say, normative ethics amongst us, and that we go by. But like applying our normative ethics to God, for example, I think is a big mistake, because it's like, well, hang on a second, because God created us. Like, of course, it would seem to us like we should hold each other accountable, but like we're a creation, right? There's a big distinction there. So in that sense, I think that God's on a totally different level than a created thing would be, for example.
Well, I like Augustine's distinguish in Free Choice of the Will, where he describes that there's two types of law: the eternal law, which would be, moral realism, and then temporal laws, which are not so much subjective, but really there are sort of like the civil laws that you find in the Old Testament, but there are just civil laws that you have in different societies. And the eternal law is upheld in each society by the government, by the governments that God places based on Romans 8 and so on. Obviously, you can start asking, well, did God ordain the Nazis and so on? That gets into a whole bunch of other stuff. But generally speaking, I like that distinction Augustine makes.
Yeah, so the other part to what I was saying is why is God considered the good? If you think about it, if God was the only thing there is, and everything flowed from God or is an emergent thing of God, then it makes sense that God is the standard because everything else owes its existence to God, right? But also, what other standard could there be if God was the only thing? So, for example, if I created a video game, I'm the standard of what the video game's like.
Sure.
So if there's a boundary, for example, where you know how you're playing a video game, you get to a certain point and it says you're going too far, and it turns you around automatically. The player could be like, "Well, what? Why is this the boundary?" But it's like, well, hang on. So because I'm the standard. I'm the person who makes the standard because I created it. If there's only one thing, and everything else flows from that one thing, it stands to reason that one thing is the standard.
Yeah. Let me pose this question to you because this is kind of what I dealt with in my video. And this is kind of along the lines of the Stephen Law kind of argument, which is, well, why can't evil God be the standard? Like, even if there's just one, why was God just all good and that's the standard? Why couldn't God have been all evil and then evil would be the standard that everything deviates from?
I would disagree with that. I would just say that evil God could be the standard, but isn't.
I personally don't think. If my logical argument, I need to expound upon it more in the ebook I'm writing. But
sure, you might say that it's contradictory, right? To have like a deceiver God, and then like his nature would be contradictory with.
Well, if you take the classical definition, like and some God is that which nothing greater can be conceived of the greatest conceivable being, then it's just like this being who has to deceive people is also dependent upon something, because deceiving is always done. I mean, you have J. Warner Wallace's three motives and so on. It's always lacking something, while a perfect being lacks nothing. So I think you can ground the good with the qualities like love and so on. Love, you're not dependent upon loving anything. You can argue that maybe God is, but the triune nature can come into play. But I sort of talk about this in this ebook I'm writing. Well, I've written it. I just need to publish it. But
yeah. So I wouldn't say like, because his question was, couldn't this standard be the standard of a deceiving God or something? And I was just saying, well, technically, I guess it could be, right? Like, there's no logical contradiction there, I don't think, except for the fact that that being could have a contradictory nature. But I don't know the exact argument I would use to show that contradiction. Well, I guess you provided a...
Well, my answer is essentially is that good and bad are asymmetric, right? They're not ontologically on a par with one another, and then God arbitrarily possesses one over the other. If God is the greatest conceivable being, then goodness has positive ontological status, whereas evil doesn't. Evil only exists in a lack in a good thing. And so if God were evil, if he were ontologically evil, then he would be lacking and therefore wouldn't be the greatest conceivable being.
I literally thought when you said good and evil are asymmetrical that they're the same ontological status with how you described that. I was going to be like, dude, that's Manichaeism, man. That's what Augustine got away from.
Asymmetrical means that one is dependent on the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't think we disagree on that. On that God's the good and that the youth of the Fro dilemma is a false dilemma, but here's something that you guys might consider. Like, this is maybe a question I'll ask y'all, because I was thinking about this earlier today, and I've heard a couple of people, I've heard a few scholars make comments about this, and I've heard it in James White's debates. He got kind of caught up with it because of his view. So in the book of John, right, where the Jews are going to stone Christ for blasphemy, and they say, because you, as a man, you claim to be God, right? Was that John 10?
I literally have it on my other article.
Okay, so regardless, in that passage, Christ says, he quotes Psalm 82, and he says something like, let's see, he says something like, well, isn't it written in your law that I said that you are gods, right? And then they kind of, I guess they, see where he's coming from. And then the next passage, though, is I and the Father are one, or the Father's in me and I am in the Father. So I guess what my question is people who take that verse to not be talking about a divine council, but rather be talking about human judges or human people. So Christ wouldn't be making a very solid point there. He would just be going, well, look, there are other humans that are called gods, right? Whom the word of God came, and then I think even I think it was a Jehovah's Witness who brought this up to James White, and he didn't really have a great response to it because he takes the Sethite view on that. But I don't know. I don't know if you guys have thought about that enough to comment on it, but
I need to be able to look at the passage physically in front of me.
Well, John 10, 25 through 33.
Okay, I thought it was John 10.
I think is where, you made yourself out to be God. Then the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. And then Jesus answered them, I showed many good works from the Father, for which them are you stoning me? Jesus answered them, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself out to be God. Now, I don't know if the passage you were talking about with the sons aren't men called gods. I don't know if that would be in the same passage, but
yeah. So let me just explain that. First of all, I love the sarcasm that Christ uses right there, where he's like, "Okay, so for which one of my good works are you stoning me for?" It's like that is perfect. Like he's like being super sarcastic with the religious people of his day, but he directly quotes right there Psalm 82. He says, "Isn't it written that you are gods?" That's a quote from Psalm 82. And so when you look at Psalm 82, it's the divine council saying. It says that the Elohim, stands in the council of Elohim and reigns or rules over them, judges them. And he tells them, you've ruled unjustly and you're going to die like men. And so the important part of that is that it says singular Elohim stands in the midst of the Elohim, plural, and rules and gives judgment and tells them they're going to die like men. This is obviously where we would say it's a divine council, but people like James White and others who take a more Augustinian view that the sons of God are just the line of Seth as opposed to the line of Cain. In their view, in John 10, all Christ is saying is, look, other humans are called gods. It's no big deal. But it's like, that's not what he's saying. Because like in the very next part, he goes, I am in the Father and the Father's in me. Like he's making a significant point there. So I just wondered if you guys thought about that. I was
going to say a couple things. Number one is I think it could partially be, I'm having trouble speaking, partially be an answer, kind of like when they asked him, should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he gives them a smart answer, proving a point. I think here, because as you said, he says, what are you stoning me for? What good works are you stoning for? And they say, no, we're stoning you for blasphemy because you make yourself be a god. And what he's pointing to in Psalms is simply saying, hey, you didn't call it blasphemy when these judges were calling themselves gods. You didn't stone them, so you're kind of being hypocrites for wanting to stone me. And then he is making a secondary point about listen, if I'm not the Son of God, if I'm not doing my Father's work, then yeah, stone me because I'm lying to you. He's like, but I really am doing the work of God. And I did just want to...
Yeah, but
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, just in my Bible here, because it has these cool twisted scripture sections, where it's just making a comment on that verse. And just says, an assortment of New Age sects and quasi-Christian cults believe that humans are divine. Often they point to this verse as support. This verse is actually a reference to Psalm 82:6, a psalm of Asaph, which describes Old Testament judges who stand in the place of God to judge his people. Being his representatives, they possess delegated authority to speak on his behalf. In Psalm 82:7, these gods/judges are said to face death because of their unjust verdicts, showing conclusively that they are human and not divine beings. The word translated gods, Elohim, in Psalm 82.
Wait a second. Go back. It said what? Showing that they're humans? Can you repeat that?
It said these gods/judges are said to face death because of their unjust verdicts, showing conclusively that they are human and not divine beings. The word translated gods, Elohim in Psalm 82:6 is translated judges in Exodus 21:6 and 22:8.
Okay, so I would just ask, why does it tell these judges that they're humans? Why does it say, and you will die like men because of your bad judgments? Like, man, you're going to die like mankind because of your bad judgments. And then again, like if the Jews are saying, well, you are human, you're making yourself out to be God. If Christ said, oh, well, other humans are pretty much God too, then he's not saying, well, I am God. He's kind of backing down a little bit.
He's making a point that they're going, that it wasn't considered blasphemy for them, so they're using a double standard to consider blasphemy for Jesus. I think that's all he's pointing out.
No, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it seems like the argument would be like the Hebrew in Psalm 82 uses Elohim, so when Jesus is quoting this, he's also making a reference to God. But even Heiser wouldn't say that Elohim always means God the Father.
Of course.
It can mean these...
But it
pagan,
always...
Well, not pagan, but, the divine council. And maybe Elohim is sort of like a standard, just like the image of God. Maybe this is sort of a representation of the judges, that they represent God judging man, and they make wrong judgments, and that's why they can be punished since they are representing God.
Right, but every reference of the Elohim, it's always reference to disembodied people. So, for example, when the witch at Endor, when Saul goes down to the witch to bring back Samuel from the dead, when she first sees him, she goes, I see an Elohim. It'd be hard for me to understand a view where these are human judges on the earth who are judging wrongly. And it says, Elohim singular stands in the midst of the Elohim. And then just go, yeah, but those are just humans. They're just judges. It's like, Michael Heiser pointed this out, but others have as well. He uses a different work from a different scholar who's, I think, a Jewish scholar. I don't have the exact name, the reference of the guy's name, but who points this out as well. But also, this verse isn't just this one verse. It corresponds to other Psalms, obviously, but I just don't think that... It just seems like almost like Christ is backing down a little bit in John 10 whenever he goes, oh, no, but no, there are other people who have been called Elohim. I'm not saying like specifically I'm God. I'm saying like other people have said it, and it wasn't blasphemy for them. No, Christ was making he was making a stronger claim, like, hey, look, remember those sons of God people who are in the council of God? Yeah, they said they were God. Or God said, you are gods. Yeah, and think about this. I'm in the Father, and the Father's in me. Like, it's just a much better claim. It's like a much stronger claim. I guess I can see where you're coming from on that. I just don't think it works, and I haven't really heard the opposing view on that. So, what Bible are you reading from, Stillman? Like, what Bible are you reading from? The NET?
Apologetics, CSB.
HCSB.
The HGSB. I haven't heard that one.
Wait, is that Apologetics Bible?
It's my Apologetics Bible.
Okay, I have a different one that uses the Christian standard.
So here's what I'll mention about that. is, that's why I went to the Hebrew on that, is because you have to be careful. There's a lot of people who sit on, so a lot of seminaries will take the Sethite view, for example. And so, of course, in their commentaries and translations, they're going to have notes that go, well, of course, this is human judges, right? But the same people who do that, like, for example, in Deuteronomy 32:7, they translate it as sons of Israel instead of sons of God. But it can't be, because Israel wasn't even a nation at that point. So, I'm just giving you we don't have to go down that trail if you don't want, but I'm just giving you a point. I would be careful because, obviously there are the different views. There are going to be commentaries on both sides that go, well, obviously this can't be actual, spiritual beings. But I don't know. I just think that's. I disagree with a few people on this. I mean, my buddy Caleb disagrees with me on this, and but I think I'm not sure if Praise does it or not either. But go ahead.
Do you think Genesis 1:27, do they use Elohim in the Hebrew? And if so, is that a reference to the divine counsel, let us make man in our image?
Yes, the Imago Dei. Yeah, so that, I think that's a reference to the divine counsel, not to the Trinity. Because of Psalm 82, where God's talking to he's in the midst of the Elohim, and he's telling them that you're not doing so well. Like, you guys are going to die like men, like mankind. And so I would definitely not say that was the Trinity, because, again, I mean,
Where's that quote from? You're going to die like men?
Psalm 82.
Yeah, I need to, like the Nephilim, I haven't looked too much into Heiser's stuff, but I know Raw from Sentinel Apologetics and IP obviously have, because you have the distinction between, well, there's something ontological about humans that represent God, and then, well, no, it's just human status over the earth that represents the image of God, because God rules over his counsel and so on. And I sort of view it as, why can't it be both? Because obviously humans have to be made a certain way to communicate with God. I think that's the image of God, and I think because of that, that's why they are worthy to rule over the earth and so on. And it represents God in both those ways.
Sure. I mean, I just figured if you guys had a different view on that, I'd like to hear the other side.
I mean,
I haven't put much thought into that.
Just my first glance of reading it, I think it's reading it a bit too literally when it says you will die like men, and since it says like men, it must mean there's something other than men to die like men. I don't get that from it. It starts in verse 6. I said, "You are gods," quote, "you are all sons of the Most High." And again, they were considered gods by the Israelites because of their exalted position and their judge. And he says, because in other words, they're getting arrogant, right? I think it's because of their status where they're called gods, they're quite arrogant. He's saying, you're all sons of the Most High, but you will die like men and fall like any other ruler. And I think he's saying, and I think that's kind of a reminder. Look, I know you're getting kind of arrogant because of your status as quote-unquote gods, but you're just like any other man. You're going to die like all the other men. And I think when he's saying you're going to die like men, it's kind of a reality check for him. It's kind of like, look, don't be getting so arrogant. You're just like everybody else. You're going to die just like them too. And so I think he's just kind of reminding them that you're only human. You're not God, just because you get that name for yourself.
Well, I can see how you would come about that. So, I mean, I think in light of these people are being called Elohim and all the other usage of Elohim in the Bible, I would look at that through a different lens, just for hermeneutic reasons, but also I
can understand
even
that.
in the parallel passage, even for in parallel passages, like for example, I mentioned Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 7, in that, it seems to be talking about God splitting up the nations and so on and so forth. And then the last part of Deuteronomy 82, because Deuteronomy 32, it says that that God allotted the nations their inheritance, and then that Jacob is my inheritance, God said. But then look at 82. The last verse says, "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for it is you who possesses all the nations." A lot of translation says, "For the nations are your inheritance." And so, but anyway, I mean, I didn't mean to make it into like a talk about that. I just wanted to get your take on John 10. Because I was thinking about that.
I mean, I think it's kind of like when he said, hey, "Well, whoever's without sin cast the first stone at this woman." I think he's just making them. I think it's kind of like, I think Jesus has a lot of gotchas that make them look stupid, and I think that's one of them. They're saying, "Hey, we're going to stone you for blasphemy because you're calling yourself God." He's like, "But you guys did that, and you didn't stone each other." And I think it's kind of a gotcha moment, like, "Oh crap, yeah, we did call these people God. They were considered gods, but we didn't stone them." I just think, I mean, and I think it's fair if you're saying why I prefer to make a stronger point. I think, yeah, maybe he could be also making a stronger point. It's just...
Well, not only has Jehovah's Witness pointed this out in James White debate, but atheists have pointed this out. They go, well, when Jesus is directly asked, you're saying that you're God, then he goes, well, hold on. Other people have said they were God. Like, people point that out and
I don't think that's the point he's making. I think it's specifically regarding, you're trying to stone me for this, but you didn't stone them for it. I don't think he's saying, sure, well, they're gods too, and I'm just like any other man god. Yeah. I don't think that's what he's saying.
Sure. Okay. I think that you could make a fair point there.
Since you brought up the passage of the woman caught in adultery, that's not in the earlier manuscripts, so I don't know if you've done research into that, Converse, or, Will. Do you think that passage is... Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry to plug up my phone because it's about to go dead. What you mentioned the Principe Adultery?
Do you think that passage is authentic because it's technically not found in the closest manuscripts we have? I think it's found. Yeah, that's where I originally read that Stillman in Cold Case. I think it's something that Jesus would also say based on other contexts, but
yeah. So here, there's two things here. One is I typically accept the modern scholarship, but I also but for a long time I've looked at other material. For example, Ken Johnson is a scholar I've followed for many years, and there's still videos of me on, forget what he calls himself now, but Christian anarchist. I mean, not Christian anarchist. Yeah, I think it was Christian anarchist. His name's like RCA apologist.
Reformed Christian apologist.
Yeah. So he used to have a different name back.
Christian anarchist.
Yeah, Christian anarchist, right. And there's still videos of me. I posted one on my Discord the other day from way back a long time ago talking about, so I have a book upstairs called The Antecedent Fathers, in which it gives you all of the fathers, church fathers before Nicaea and all the claims that they made and all their writings and so forth. And so I looked up, for example, 1 John 5:7, and it showed that Cyprian wrote about it in like 200, I forget what dates it was, but like 200 something. He wrote, he said, "The Lord says," and then he quoted 1 John 5:7. So I used that. So I've been looking at verses like that for a long time that are supposedly not in the Bible, and I've questioned whether that it's a reliable source to go based off just manuscript evidence.
Well, you need church fathers too, because they're the ones who have used it and had the manuscripts themselves, and what we don't have today. So,
right, and so my argument back then was something like, "Hey, look, we know from church fathers that people were taking verses out of the Bible, or no, that people were adding to the Bible, right, and that people were taking away from the Bible. I believe it was the Marcionites that were taking away, and so I said I would make an argument like, if Cyprian's quoting this verse, we know that it was a quote because he says, "The Lord says," and then he quoted it. And I, like I said, I have that reference upstairs, but I referenced it in my discussion with Jim Majors. But anyway, if Cyprian's quoting that,
then, but it's not found in like until like the 1200s in the manuscript tradition. So it's not found until super late. So then you have to ask, well, is the manuscript tradition reliable, or could it be that Christians were being persecuted early on, so that their documents were being, if they were caught with these documents, they would be destroyed, or they would be persecuted, for example. And then, but now I would take more of a position like Jonathan Sheffield. Are you guys familiar with him? So I don't necessarily take his position, but I basically go with the auxiliary hypothesis, and then in the back of my mind I go, okay, but the whole text types and everything could be a wrong way to even look at this, because as he argues, like, okay, well, why do we have these verses being quoted in sermons by church fathers, and then they don't show up until hundreds of years later in the manuscript tradition? And then why is, like, Mark being quoted by church fathers, the long ending, for example, and so on and so forth. So that's my view on that, is that these verses could be authentic, but that the textual criticism is about criticism. And so we do need to be critical and have critical, our critical thinking skills like involved, but at the same time, we don't need to be critics, because obviously, here's another good point that, and this is the last thing I'll say and I'll shut up, but I've made this point before, and I've heard Jonathan Sheffield make it recently, where it's something like, okay, so if these doctrines crept into our, so if the pornography, adultery, and 1 John 5:7 and these other verses weren't in the early church material, the church was staunchly against adding or taking away from. We know that. They were super particular, and they were super scared that people were going to add or take away from their Bibles. And then these verses just crept in all of a sudden. I don't think churches would have just went, yeah, well, they said it was in the manuscripts, or like, it just doesn't seem like it could have crept in like that. Or the long ending of Mark, for example. Like, that's a lot of verses to just creep into the church, especially when you're worried about heresies. And like, if you looked at the debates they had over verses that were in the Bible with other people at that time, that just translated them differently. Like, these people were like, they didn't know if they were going to have their Bible next week, so they were like super concerned with keeping it accurate and so on and so forth. So yeah, I just find it hard to believe.
And even if you read like some of the ancient fathers, like, they're really concerned about people adding to God's word. And one of the warnings you get from several of the early church fathers is that there is to not, especially let some guy named Mike Jones add to the word of God.
Oh man, you give Mike such a hard time. Mike's pretty good.
I didn't write that. These early church fathers wrote it. I mean, I'm off the hook there.
Well, yeah. What references was that?
Well, they prophesized about this inspiring Mike Jones guy. I mean,
yeah. Almost every pope has said, beware.
Yeah, you guys give me a hard time. It's going to be like 5 years down the road, y'all are going to be giving me a hard time. You're going to be like, oh, this Converse Contender guy, he accepts the man's word.
Do you listen to Michael Heiser?
Yeah.
Oh, you take man's word over God's word.
Right, exactly.
Everyone go unsubscribe.
Exactly. No,
but make sure it's okay.
But what do y'all think about those verses? I mean, do you guys agree with me on the...
So I have to apologize. While you were doing that, I was looking for something specifically that I never found in Cold Case Christianity, so I didn't hear a lot of it.
Okay. So basically I said, hey, look, I can accept kind of as an auxiliary hypothesis that the current modern scholarship is correct, and like James White and Daniel Wallace and these guys are right, that there are, we should follow the manuscript tradition, and that's where our evidence lies, and that it's like 100 piece puzzle, and that we have 110 pieces. because the extra verses added, all of that, I can accept that as a hypothesis and work off of it, like a working hypothesis. But then in the back of my mind, I also accept that there's a hypothesis that, well, hang on a second, how did the early church fathers quote these verses? And a lot of people will say, no, that's not a quote. Well, when he says the Lord says and says it, that's definitely a quote. So even for James White, I remember a debate he was in where he was pointing out verses that were supposedly original to the Jews, and he says, no, if it doesn't say the Lord says that formulation, then it's not original. And so even according to his criterion, that would be that would work. And so Cyprian, for example, quotes 1 John 5:7. There are long endings of martyrs quoted. There are sermons by church fathers who quote verses that are supposedly added later. So, and then my second point was that also how does the church, who are so significantly attached to their text and who are super worried about heresies and people coming in to change things, how do they just let these doctrines grow up, and how do they let these verses just enter their Bibles and go along with it? I mean, I can look at those two as like competing hypotheses and say, I can understand both of them, but I'm not going to just take one over the other, right? I'm going to look at both, because take the example I gave of Cyprian quoting 1 John 5:7. Well, 1 John 5:7 doesn't show up in the manuscript evidence for like 1,200 years. So like, you got to be careful. But like, what's your take on that?
Am I muted?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. I muted myself for a second. Well, I liked how you add in there, because J. Warner Wallace talks about this. Like, even if we didn't have the manuscripts, you could still tell a lot about Christ by their writings and what they wrote on their commentaries and so on certain Bible passages. And I think even if some of those passages aren't authentic, it doesn't affect much of the New Testament.
When you say crept in late, I'd have to know specifically what you mean by that, because that's the point J. Warner Wallace is making, is that the story of the woman who committed adultery is going to get started seems to be later, but it's not the same as, for example, the late Gospel of Judas, where it's something that's completely contradictory to what all the rest of the Gospels teach.
So the Wallace that I quoted was actually Daniel Wallace.
Okay.
Not J. Warner Wallace, but so what like, take for example the Cyprian quote. That's why I say Cyprian quoted in like the years. I'd have to go upstairs and get my Ante-Nicene Fathers volume 5 to look at the exact date, but he quoted, I think it was 200 that he lived around the year 2. It was somewhere between 200 and so anyway, it was before the Council of Nicaea, obviously, because it's in the Ante-Nicene Fathers. So he quoted that way back then, using the formulation "Thus saith the Lord," but in the manuscript traditions, it doesn't show up for 1,200 years. So that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I mean by like shows up late. 1 John 5:7 doesn't show up in the manuscripts until like the year, I can't remember, like maybe 1250 or something. You'd have to look it up to verify that. But
I thought it was like the 400 AD manuscripts, and like the earliest Greek manuscripts we have don't have it included.
No, 1 John 5:7 shows.
Is that the woman caught in adultery?
No. It's,
okay, never mind.
It's the verse that people use for Trinitarian. Like, it's the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit and the Holy Ghost passage. It's just one verse, but it basically is a succinct quotation that shows the Trinity, simply put. And so
I think a lot of this stuff, it comes down to the reconstruction. So I mean, it could be, and like the people obviously who construct these know way more than I do, but like, I think in some cases, like, just because they found something late, they have to determine whether or not, just because they found it late, whether or not it could have been part of the original, whether it could have been added, whether it could have been taken out early, and then now we're just finding it later. And, they have to make a judgment. Like, this Bible talks about different versions that make different judgment calls about, like, well, does it contradict any doctrine? Would it make any doctrine change? And if it doesn't, then it's kind of up to the judgment of the person compiling it, and so it still does get complicated. I'm not going to claim to be any expert on it.
Sure. Yeah, so that's my take on that, is just that I'm willing to accept that verses like 1 John 5:7, for example, or some of the others don't show up until late. So actually, I looked it up. It's 1 John 5:7. Let's see, make sure this is right. So unless what I'm reading here is wrong, it says that 1 John 5:7 doesn't show up in any Greek manuscripts until the 1600s. So unless this is incorrect, or 1500. So unless this is all wrong, so Cyprian, the quote that I said was around 200. It's actually in 250 AD. He quoted it in 250 AD. So, but the earliest manuscripts for it in Greek are in the 1500s. But there are Latin manuscripts. So, for example, the oldest Latin manuscript we have with 1 John 5:7 is in 550 AD. So,
that's pretty early.
in the 6th century for Latin, that's not very good manuscript evidence to say, well, this verse didn't show up in the Greek until the 1500s, but it was in Latin, in the 6th century, but wait a second, it was quoted in 250, and it was quoted by other fathers early on as well. Like, for example, it was quoted by Tertullian, 200. It was quoted by Priscillian in 350, and others. But in Athanasius quoted in 350 as well. So, that to me is a very interesting topic, and is a very interesting. It's very questionable whether you should take the manuscripts as your main source of inquiry on the verses that are supposedly added. That's I can't just accept the manuscript tradition, because like I said before, you may not have heard this, you might have been away. We had early church fathers telling us, like, people are adding and taking away from the scripture. So it could be that the most of the manuscripts that we have are, manuscripts where people have taken away the verses, the early ones, right? So I'm just saying, like, you have to base it all on a presupposition that the manuscripts are what's correct.
Yeah. So the main takeaway I'm getting is that John Dunphy is a King James onlyist. So on that note, I do want to ask, well, because John asked you earlier what your favorite argument for God was.
Jesus obviously spoke King James language, so.
Oh, he used the and thou.
Well, there's obviously movies where Jesus is speaking English, so those must be documentaries of his life.
Right, and the King James version was good enough for Apostle Paul. It's good enough for me.
No, but so I want to ask you the reverse of what John asked you earlier, which is, are there any arguments for God you think are like particularly bad, or not even necessarily bad, just your least favorite? Maybe you don't like using them.
Yeah, this one's easier for me because I don't find Pascal's wager to be a good argument, and I feel like
to be an argument though.
Well,
out of its context, yes.
Well, wait a second, because I feel like it's the argument that most people who aren't in apologetics or know nothing about apologetics. Well,
exactly. They don't know anything about arguments. It's not an argument.
But
they're the type of people to say people aren't brought into Christianity by arguments or stuff like that.
Yeah. But even just like your average person, like you go run into somebody and you go, "Hey, I'm an atheist," blah, 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 just messing with them, they'll go, "Well, hang on a second. Think about it. If you die today, right, what do you gain?" Like, and if, and I'm just like, is that how you want to believe? Is you want to be like, oh, what can I gain through belief? It's like, hold on a second. Like, we shouldn't believe because we can gain something.
Yeah.
And, but Pascal, like,
Pascal never
I think that he makes a good
argument.
Yeah. So that's what I was about to say, is that Pascal does make a good point that if by the wager all he's saying is like, hey, look, the stakes are high.
Yeah, he's just saying, hey, listen, investigate it if you're gonna make such a weighty like the consequences.
That's what I was. Decision. So that's what I was about to say is that like, sure, if Pascal just wanted to say like, hey, careful, think about these carefully because the stakes are high, then I go, bravo. But
yeah, that's what Pascal meant.
People, but people use that as an argument. Well, so you said, what's the worst argument? And I go, that's it. Like, I don't want to believe in something because it could give me benefits or something. It's like, no, I want to believe
all of us are only Christians because we're afraid of hell anyway. So.
Right.
That, or you're just afraid of no one being there for you, so you need an imaginary friend.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, there's a flying spaghetti monster, and then there's a flying box of wheat thins.
Yeah, I personally find comfort in the giant teapot rotating the sun.
Right.
Or Carl Sagan's imaginary dragon.
So I mean, we're joking, but all jokes aside, like I do think that being used as an argument is a terrible argument.
Okay, but what's an actual argument that you're not a fan of?
Well,
or
people use it as an
think it's specifically weak.
So another argument that apologists use, I guess you mean.
Yeah, that maybe you just kind of find. I mean, and maybe you even agree with its conclusion, but you just don't like to use it in conversations.
So probably the cosmological argument.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you a B theorist?
No, I'm not a B theorist. I don't take the B theory time.
Are you an A theorist?
Yeah, but here's the thing: is I would just say that I think that everything begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, therefore it has a cause. Sure, but the beginning of the universe is really questionable. So that's
I don't agree. But continue.
You think, well, I was just gonna say, like, even if all the consensus of science is like all the evidence we have is that the Big Bang happened and so on and so forth, it doesn't necessitate that there isn't something prior to the Big Bang which prior, obviously with time, it's that's why I say prior instead of before the Big Bang. But prior, like, as in...
So what before time, matter, and space would cause time, matter, and space to exist? So if there's something prior to, obviously the Big Bang T equals 0, there's no time. So with no time, there's no space or matter. So you have the beginning of that. So what would that be that is prior?
Well, all I would say is that it's an undiscovered phenomenon that we don't know.
And naturalistic pantheism.
No, hold on. Because even though the sophisticated atheistic scientists will say things like, even if there is, like, you could just say, you don't even have to say before, you could just say on the other side of the Big Bang, if there's this quantum realm, that is the beginning of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said that, because I used to use it as an argument. But when I think about it, it could be like a two-way mirror. Like, you have the Big Bang in the middle, and then time and space and everything goes this way. But it's like if you rewound it all the way back on the other side, right? It could just be time and space and everything going this way. Like,
well, see, that's like whatever. Models. Reasonable Faith has a whole chapter dedicated to all these models. And it's not even the case that there's all these models and just most of the evidence happens to be on the Big Bang side. It's as people investigate these other models, like I think that might be called the oscillating model, although I could be wrong. But as they investigate,
oscillating model is universe cycles. It contracts and then expands for infinite times.
That's kind of a more boundary one, and guys can't see what I'm doing here. I won't do it, but as scientists investigate those other models, they keep accidentally proving the Big Bang. They're like, oh, well, here's a model, the oscillating model. Let's try to prove this, and it proves the Big Bang. And then here's another model where there's maybe this infinite regress. Oh, it proves the Big Bang, and this is what keeps happening.
Yeah, so I'm familiar, but like Sean Carroll and others, Tom Jump, for example, always quotes Nimar Mahad. They come with they make models just specifically to negate those claims. Like, for example, that's what our universe's time, space, and matter are. But we don't know what preceded it. So, for example, there could be something completely undiscovered
that's just an argument from ignorance, though, I think.
It is. I agree.
Well, not only that, but when they do this, they don't have any evidence to show that model is even coherent. They're just saying, hey, here's an eternal model.
It's like the Matt Dillahunty epistemology.
Well, keep in mind, though, that you asked me for something that I agree with this conclusion, but that I don't think is a good argument. I think is a weak argument.
Fair enough.
And the reason why I say that is because there are so many avenues of disagreement in that second premise.
So maybe you just don't find it tactically useful
right. So when you guys go like, well, hold on, that doesn't like. I'm just saying like I don't argue it anymore like I used to because, I would have to be like the highest ranking cosmologist ever for people to go, well, he's the best cosmologist there is, so he would know. Like even Stephen Hawking.
People can do that with almost anything. I mean,
like, are you guys familiar with why am I blanking on his name now? Stephen Penrose.
Did he debate William Lane Craig on Unbelievable?
Yeah,
that's Roger Penrose.
Yeah. So Penrose worked with Stephen Hawking on. They partnered on on working on the Big Bang and such. And Penrose wrote something like recently that, in one of his newest books, that the book that Stephen Hawking wrote to promote the Big Bang with the best evidence. He said the worst evidence that he gave was evidence for the Big Bang or something like that. Whatever it was, Penrose just goes, hey, look, me and Stephen Hawking, we are partners. Like, we're on the same level as far as the science goes, okay? And I don't think the Big Bang is the case. And then he gives arguments for it. And a lot of them are arguments that I don't know enough about. Some of it, when it gets down to like the quantum mechanics and everything, I just don't have the.
I mean, I'm mainly a philosophical guy, and so like even if I'm having these conversations and people want to push the beginning back and say maybe there's something before the Big Bang, I make them nail down on one specific thing. Do you believe there's a beginning, regardless of how far back it goes? And if there's a beginning, well, then my argument still goes through. Or they have to say, well, no, I'm holding out for a model that is eternal. Well, then you fall into, number one, the problem with the philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past. But then even worse is if you have an eternal or an eternity prior to the Big Bang, then you have the problem of, well, why didn't the Big Bang happen an eternity ago, or millions of years prior than it did, or millions of years after it did? They've run all these.
Yeah, couldn't you say that about God, though?
No, because
like, how does God exist eternity before the Big Bang?
Because God doesn't exist in eternity before the Big Bang. He exists timelessly before the Big Bang. So I'm saying people aren't claiming a timeless thing unless you're Tom John. So, they're claiming an actual infinite series of moments prior to the Big Bang.
So one thing that I think that could go to supporting this is the principle that if there are the right conditions for something to obtain, it obtains. So, for example, if there's gas, fire, and oxygen in a place, then, are
you an airbender now?
An explosion happens because there. But if you have gas, fire, and oxygen all in the same place at the same time, they can't wait to obtain. If there's the right conditions for it to obtain, it has to obtain. So you can't really push back. Like,
that's
everything
was someone
there.
Claims there's an infinite number of moments before. Yes, that's exactly the problem you're talking about.
Yeah. So I guess that's to wrap it up. I mean, I guess that's why I put it that way. Is that there are too many avenues of disagreement with the premise in the argument. Now, with the ontological,
in my experience, most people just don't. They're just like, yeah, Big Bang. We agree with you. But no, that's a fair point.
Yeah. Well, not more recently though. I mean, for the last,
Well, yeah. If you're talking to like, say, a specific like career atheist or YouTube atheist, where it's their point to deny these arguments, then I think you're right. For the average person, they don't tend to disagree.
But like Penrose, for example, he's been making a point out of it lately to go, and Sean Carroll and some of these other guys, they're making a point out of it to say that Well, sure. If what your premises are saying are true, then it's true. But then they just deny the second premise. So that's why I just.
So you're not saying it's a weakness of the argument. It's just.
The argument. No, yeah, I agree with the argument totally, and I agree with the conclusion. I just would say, I would rather not argue about all that. I would rather go my approach and just go, do you agree that it's evidence? Like, since we see order in nature, or just pick something and then go, wouldn't you agree that the cosmological argument, wouldn't you agree that it at least lends some credibility of some monicum of evidence toward God? And then, like, a lot of times I can get people to go, well, yeah, it's very weak, but I guess it could give some evidence. And then you see what I mean? And then the whole along the way, I'm going, okay, sure. I don't care. You can challenge the premises, but it gives me some bit of evidence, right? And then so all along the way, I'm just adding up, And so that's what I do. Is I would rather use an argument as far as I can take it with someone, rather than go through all the minutia of arguing. No, it is valid and sound, to the smallest degree.
I will say though, I don't use the Kalam anymore because there's this one objection I just can't answer. If everything needs a cost, what caused God?
Yeah,
that one's.
I love.
Apparently, the man who takes man's word over God's word can't answer it either. He apparently has a 5-minute video on it, but
Yeah, I mean that's a really tough one. I wish I could appeal to God's eternity or something like that, but like
just think about it. If the universe needs a creator, then why doesn't God need a creator?
Right.
And the one that got me is that if you're trying to explain the complexity of the universe, you can't posit an explanation that's more complex than the thing you're trying to explain. That's what got me.
Exactly. Right. No such thing as divine simplicity. I mean,
I mean, if I were to write a book, for example, you couldn't say that I'm more complex than the book that I created. It's silly.
Posit that though. You're too complicated.
Well, any book is more complex than the thoughts these contain.
Of course, it causes an infinite regress too. So,
well, let me bring this up because we're just kind of talking about random things here instead of like I didn't know if you guys wanted like a structured interview or whatever, but
I didn't have anything planned. From our conversation, I can tell a lot of the time the interviews that I have questions for. It just, seems like your typical interview. I just like open discussion.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you guys about this. So, because I haven't heard any other theists really talking about it, but, so since I've been back, I've been seeing a lot about Krauss and Steve, what's his name? Krauss and David Silverman and their sexual abuse allegations and all,
That's C-17 classified because I don't want to get demonetized.
Oh, okay. That's yeah.
And also, I haven't read enough into it, but.
Oh, will you get demonetized for that? Talking about that?
Maybe.
Okay. Because the Magic Sandwich Show actually had David Silverman on.
I just don't really want to discuss something like that I don't know enough about. If you get what I'm saying, maybe Stelman knows more about it than me, but
before still okay.
We are into the third hour, so it's probably YouTube, higher ups probably aren't going to be watching this far into it to demonetize us. But
well, what I was going to say,
some of my videos have got demonetized when talking about Epstein and stuff like that. So
But he did.
This is also another controversial.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
The point that I was going to make though is that so now there's this atheist conference, okay, and Lawrence Krauss is going to be there, and Neil deGrasse Tyson, which has been accused of sexual assault as well, is going to be there, right? And the promoter that's putting on the conference was just there's a video that just came out where he was asked about Lawrence Krauss and others being there, and he goes, and his response was, "Come on, man, we're both guys. We both kind of done some stuff where we didn't know what what the girls were thinking, like we And his response was kind of like very offensive to the people that are going to be going to the conference. So I just seen that Shannon did a video on that.
Shannon Q.
Yeah, and she did a video basically saying he had been, he was wrong and all. So, I was kind of watching it, and I don't know, I was almost enjoying the fact that the conference was going to be a blowover because of this. But at the same time, I was catching myself going, but don't enjoy it because there's, bad reasons involved, but in the back of my mind, I'm kind of like, cool, looking into it. So maybe that's wrong, but.
Well, I'll just say one thing. They're complaining. I'm not agreeing that the Catholic Church scandals are, a good thing. I'm saying they're pretty bad, but they're complaining about that. But when an atheist like Krauss, I don't know the details, so I'm not going to make any claims here, but if they did do what you're talking about, I'm sure many online atheists would defend them and be like, well, people can fall into that sometimes, not thinking about it. Or just plead determinism. So
we have a fallen
that would be my
nature.
defense. Just Your Honor, it was just my genetics and environment and my rational worldview, which says I'm determined. I couldn't have done otherwise, or even chose to do that in the first place.
This is completely off topic, but it just made me think of it because the way you're talking about that. Have either of you heard? It's a radio debate, but it's on YouTube between Dennis Prager and Christopher Hitchens. It's hilarious because Christopher Hitchens the whole time, he's doing his shtick of Christians and religious people do horrible,
God is
awful
celestial
things.
And
but then every single time Dennis Prager brought up an example of an atheist doing an immoral thing or atheist regimes doing an immoral thing, Christopher Hitchens would go, well, you would expect that from human beings because human beings are capable of great evils, but that's not an indictment on atheism. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Human beings do great evil. It's not an indictment on their belief system. Thank you. Now, of course, with atheism, it happens to be true, but that's another point.
So I'm looking at the chat here, and I see Prey said that he disagrees with my objection to the column. I actually don't have an objection to the column.
Yeah, he was just basically saying that, hey, these are the easy avenues atheists take. Yeah,
so I was asked, what is an argument that I don't use because I think that it's weak or because, that I agree with its conclusions. And I said that one because there are too many outs for an atheist to take. So I don't use that in an argument. It's not that those were my arguments against it.
I think what you're saying is it's unpragmatic because it's like focusing on sort of like the whole young earth creationism versus theistic evolution debate. There's so much material into it.
Here we go again with the pragmatism.
See, this is my thing. There's so much material in it, and if you make it seem like it's a core debate to Christianity, you're never get anything solved. Well, the resurrection and all these other core points of orthodoxy, there's much better cases for, and they're not as neurons. Well, you're sort of saying that, with the Kalam, you can sort of come up with all these models, whether they're true or not. It's going to take a lot more research, and people can take advantage of the principle of charity and start giving all these outs without explanation, and then they can just assert something, and then it takes too long for them to either, verify that assertion, to verify their assertion without actually justifying it, because most assertions they make are just mere assertions, like all these other models are not justified. Or, you take the time to refute their model that they're not even defending in the first place, and it takes you down a bunch of rabbit trails. Like Mike Jones, he's a great debater. I think sometimes, though, that he goes down rabbit trails that his opponents will intentionally do. Like, I think Matt Dillahunty did that. I think Vegan Gains obviously did that. I think Destiny probably did that a few times in their idealism debate. But I think what you're saying is it can just create too many rabbit holes that doesn't get to the core of the point.
Yeah, it's a long about argument. I mean, because then you have to be a scientist in order to make the argument. Like, it's just William Lane Craig is perfect for that argument because he studied time for like 11 years. So, it's like, even though he's a philosopher of science and not like a astrophysicist or a cosmologist, like he studied the philosophy of time for 11 or 12 years, something like that. And like, you have to think like, I mean, I don't.
Well, you got to realize he had the same amount of time as us to do that. So
right. Like, I don't think I could study time for that long. I think I would start to get bored and be like, it's just taking too much time to do.
Yeah, I don't have the time to study time. It's taking too much time.
Well, I'm an atheist commenter, and I only looked at Reddit blogs, so I already know more than a PhD philosopher.
Right. That's actually a good point. I love when atheists go, "Well, Craig is an idiot." It's like, oh yeah, neither one of his doctorates are good enough for you. Or like John Lennox, like John Lennox is such a moron. It's like, oh yeah, 3 doctorates, that's not enough. Like maybe you should get a 4th.
This Richard Dawkins fellow, though, he knows what it's about. The Richard Dawkins show. The pilot came out a few days, like last week, I think. So hopefully it picks up, but it probably won't. We're going to cast it to NBC and see if they take up the Richard Dawkins show. Me and Selman are presenting it. I'm obviously Jerry Seinfeld, and he's George Costanza, but
I'm Kramer. How dare you? Hey, buddy.
Are you 6'3" with wavy hair? You even said I look like Jerry Seinfeld, so you can't be Seinfeld. Okay, you can be Elaine Bennis then.
No.
No, you're George Costanza.
Yeah, I can see him busting.
George is getting upset.
George is getting upset. Well, can't stand you.
Can't stand you. Yeah, and then you would have to, being Jerry Seinfeld, in your apologist arguments, you would have to make like some observation about an obscure fact. Like, the third wheel in the shopping cart that's always like wiggling. Don't you hate that? And you'd have to do that.
This is like the shaky premise in
ontological argument.
Right. Like, don't you hate when somebody challenges the second premise in your argument? It's hilarious.
Spaghetti monster, what's with that? It's got meatballs, it's got noodles. That can't be timeless.
That'd be pretty funny, actually. Do you have any? I don't have any questions. Any more questions I want to ask? Do you have any more discussion questions you want to ask us?
We give you the floor.
Sure. I'll just interview you guys. How about that?
Okay.
All right. What are your? Can you guys both give me one of your favorite books that you're reading?
John, you go first. I'm gonna look through my bookshelf.
I don't have a favorite because they all address different topics. I guess Evidence Demands a Verdict is pretty good with all the history stuff because they give all the main arguments, mainstream stuff. It gets to the points, so but then you get into more philosophical issues. It's not published
yet because I'm still editing it down to make it better, but I just wrote a book review of this for Tim Stratton's website, Free Thinking Ministries, The Right Side of History, by Ben Shapiro. So, I mean, obviously, everybody knows Ben Shapiro's, primarily a political guy, but it had such great, implications for apologetics, and it gave such a great history starting in Jerusalem. And Ben Shapiro, obviously, we know he's a Jew, but he had only good things to say about Christianity. He kind of started in with Judaism and talked about how that developed a superior morality to all the pagan nations and everything. And what he said was Christianity essentially took that and just universalized that moral code. And he gets a little bit of the philosophy as far as the differences between Judaism and Christianity a little inaccurate, but other than that, it was great. And he basically talked about...
he's had MacArthur on his show.
And Ravi Zacharias.
Yeah, and Stephen Meyer.
Yeah.
Stephen Meyer was on the show?
Stephen Meyer.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
But it's such a great book, especially from an apologetic standpoint, because he talks about what made the West great and what even allowed... Because, atheists like to think, well, we're Enlightenment thinkers, and what happened with the Enlightenment was we kind of did away with our religious superstitions, and we decided to believe in science now. And Ben Shapiro points out that the Enlightenment only happened because we were built on a society of Judeo-Christian morals and Greek reason. And he points to, if it were just the Enlightenment, then this could have happened anywhere. But he points to the French Enlightenment and how it was built on humanistic philosophies and how it just led into, and any society that adopted those kind of Enlightenment principles that were just based on humanistic philosophies either collapsed into dust or became murderous. And how even the French Revolution and Enlightenment had influences that built the Nazi society and the communist societies. And so it's a really good historical kind of view of these things and where societies and civilizations go, to the dark places they go when they reject either Judeo-Christian morals or Greek reason.
Yeah, I've heard that response about Athens and Jerusalem. Thanks so much for your great response in that. So, favorite apologist for either of you guys?
Well, I just have to point out something that's so hypocritical of Stobin. You know, he always says Mike Jones takes man's word over God's word, but his favorite book wasn't the Bible. He picked some Jewish dude who wears a yarmulke.
Okay.
And it isn't clear, but taking man's word over God's word.
Unless you want to call the Bible an apologetics book, which obviously has great.
Why not the apologetics Bible?
You know what? I wanted.
Get out.
I just wrote your book review of this. I wanted an excuse to talk about it because I'm actually going to read it. Ravi Zacharias, and I have this in the book review. Ravi Zacharias himself said that this book is one of the finest he's ever read. He's going to have to go back to it, and he thinks it should be required reading at universities if, in his words, professors have the courage.
See, that's just some random guy you're quoting. It's taking man's word over God's word. What does the Bible have to say about Ben Shapiro?
Right.
Bible's...
You have to look. I think it said something about him somewhere in Amos or Habakkuk. But actually, I would have to pick the Da Vinci Code, and I think that should be taught in schools.
Which book?
The Da Vinci Code.
Oh, yeah. I like the 2007 documentary called The Lost Tomb of Jesus,
Right.
Where they actually found the bones of the ossuary of Jesus, son of Joseph.
Well, that one's pretty good, except for it's not as good as the one where they realized that Christ actually traveled to Asia and I've got that book. The National Citizens of America, I've got that book. Actually, I got it in the other room here. Yeah, but it's not as good as the documentary where they found out that Jesus traveled to Asia and wasn't actually killed, but that whenever he got off the cross, he was resuscitated and he traveled to Asia and became and taught Buddhist monks. And there's actually a temple there today that he supposedly helped found. So,
well, and also after that trip, he took
that's a serious
he took like an 1800-year break. He gets tired because God clearly gets tired after creating in Genesis 6 or Genesis 1. On day 7, he gets tired because apparently he's omnipotent, but yet he gets tired. So he takes his 1800-year break, and then he goes over to Missouri and reveals to Joseph Smith about more revealed scripture. But he also in between there went to Muhammad and also revealed some stuff that I made all these claims about being Jesus, but use arguments saying that the Bible has been corrupted and so on, makes new stuff up about me, but
Well, here's an interesting point. Since you brought that up kind of jokingly, but, I thought maybe I'd bring this up. You guys know, what's the guy's name? The Mormon guy, Kwaku?
I wouldn't know.
He debated James White. He's a Mormon. He debated James White on Apologia Radio on their show. And then Tom Jump had him on recently. And he takes this unhistorical view on Mormonism where he kind of makes it like, oh yeah, anybody can be a Mormon. He almost makes it like there's not, I don't know. It's a more of a modernized version of Mormonism where he tries to get rid of a lot of the problems with it. But in the comments, I asked him because he said something about the Trinity or something in that interview, and I asked him in the comments. He said, "Oh yeah, I'll answer any questions in the comments." So there were like 4 or 5 people who gave comments and for questions, and I was one of those people, and I put, "Well, what do you think about?" What do you think about the Carmen Christi, Philippians chapter 2? And he didn't respond to it. And so whenever he was responding to everybody else except for me, I asked him again. He never responded to it again. And I just think that verse is a killer for people, man. That is the most underused set of verses in the whole Bible, where it says Christ had equality with the Father before the world began, and that he emptied himself to become a human. I don't hear that verse from apologists hardly ever.
That was just a late insertion, so we can ignore it. Also, Jesus was just a regular man. He was buried in the Talbot family tomb because Mary Magdalene was his wife. We know that from the inscriptions.
Oh man, that is so funny. I was on.
Where'd you read that about, Stillman?
Some heretic wrote a paper proving it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was on Math Pick's show last night, and there's a girl on there named Scientist Mel, and she brought up like the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. I had to point out like, yeah, a lot of these works are late, but I didn't really get a chance to like go into detail on it. But that manuscript was from like the 6th or 7th century, and so I just thought that was interesting that you're joking about it, and this is what she wrote.
John just wrote a paper talking about the different tombs and the possible burial sites, and
the Talbayet family tomb is the least likely, but the garden tomb is much better. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah, I seen your video on the tomb of Jesus.
Oh, there's my next question. What do you think of that?
Right. I thought it was highly accurate, and I think you're onto something.
I think he's onto something.
A theist, highly accurate.
What? I think he's onto something all right, and it stinks. It's BS.
Highly accurate, though. But I define highly accurate meaning highly inaccurate.
Oh, okay. It's because I'm a theist, isn't it? Well, I mean, you know.
Right. Well, yeah, it's theist logic, but.
Of course.
So you ask favorite apologists?
Of course we find an ossuary with Jesus' name on it, son of Joseph, but the theist logic that can't fit my narrative.
Well, people also think that James' ossuary was stolen from that in like the 1980s when the site was not destroyed but was damaged by construction workers, and some actually, this 2007 documentary, I think they actually argue that this was stolen, but the James ossuary was found way before 1980 when the Talbayet family tomb was discovered. So it's just a misrepresentation of information. Because because if Jesus or if James was the brother of Jesus, then obviously they would have been buried in that tomb as well.
Yeah, but it's funny, like as you pointed out in the paper, like the name doesn't even actually translate to Mary Magdalene, but it's like
Martha.
Yeah, but like hey, we can make money making a History Channel special and everybody will watch it. So let's go with the misinformation.
Well, they never consulted scholars, and the site was, if this truly was a site that was going to destroy Christians' faith because they finally found the bones of Jesus, or the remains of them, I don't think the bones, I may be uncertain of this, but I don't think bones necessarily survive in the ossuaries, but besides that point, they probably do, but beside that point, I think if scholars and archaeologists like Alan Kloner, who discovered it, if he was actually convinced by this, then they would have many papers popularized this than a 2007 Discovery Channel documentary. But pulp culture for the win.
Like the Zeitgeist movie.
Well, I feel like you're taking the word of man. So.
Well, I would just be quoting scholars. It was just man's word. Yeah,
man's word. That's the best.
That's the best for you?
That's me. Like, all I can do is quote Michael Heiser. So.
Yeah, I can tell. And all Stillman can quote is Kent Hovind, but
Hey, if you're quoting anything out of here that's not the red letters, it's the man's word who wrote that book of the Bible.
Yeah. Because also Jesus, brought down with him. Jesus was born with the King James Bible.
Yes, not only was he born in the King James Bible, but it's a known fact that as the people were writing down, they didn't even know, but certain words they'd write down would just come out as red ink, magically, kind of like water turning into wine, and that's how you knew it was Jesus' words.
When Mary had Jesus, the Holy Roman Catholic Bible came with him in the Immaculate Conception. And the King James as well.
I thought God just handed Moses the Bible on the Mount Sinai.
Yeah. Okay, enough sarcasm. Did you ask us our favorite apologists?
Yep.
None. They're all horrible. No, I'm kidding. Again, it just depends on the topic for me. Like philosophy of time, obviously William Lane Craig. But then something like on Thomism, I don't want to say Craig misrepresents it, but I just don't think he's done as much study into Thomism. And I think people like Edward Fazer he's a Thomist, obviously, and I find some of his stuff interesting, but, reading Thomas Aquinas is probably my favorite medieval apologist and philosopher, then Anselm right after him, but Yeah, it would just depend on the topic for me. And Stallman's is also Kent Hovind.
Incorrect.
Right.
No, my favorite apologist, Tim Stratton, is up there. And I'm saying like he doesn't get enough recognition. He's like a really smart guy, and of course he's busy, so he doesn't have so much output as some other.
Yeah, that's an obscure. Yeah, I was gonna say that's an obscure reference. But.
Tim Stratton, Dinesh D'Souza is underrated, and here's actually a comment I'd like to make, because there are only two. And if you guys know of more people that I don't know of, let me know. But typically, when you have somebody who's like a really like the genius level, like in apologetics, and they're really very well versed at debating and the information, they're kind of lacking when it comes to the political realm. Whereas if you have a guy like Ben Shapiro or somebody who's like really sophisticated in the kind of the political conservative debate stuff, they're kind of lacking when it comes to the apologetic area. The only two people I know of who are like absolute geniuses when it comes to debating both apologetics and politics are Dinesh D'Souza is one of them, and Dennis Prager is the other one. If there's any other people, let me know.
I actually brought up Dinesh D'Souza in I had a discussion with Brenda.
Well, Alex Jones obviously would be another scholar outside for political and theological debates.
Sure.
Because Hillary Clinton is also a demon, but
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Obviously, I'm quite a scholar. I don't remember where he got his PhD from, but.
I can't even do his face.
But on a serious note, I do like that. I got that Dinesh D'Souza book, America. I have that book, and I like Dinesh. I brought him up in my discussion with.
He's had a couple debates with Christopher Hitchens as well.
Yeah, I've seen him.
Death of a Nation.
So I actually brought up Dinesh D'Souza in my discussion with Brenda, and of course Brenda hated Dinesh D'Souza because Brenda's on the left pretty far, but I definitely think Dinesh D'Souza is underrated. But Stillman, to hear you say your favorite apologist is a Catholic, it's kind of
Catholic.
Dinesh D'Souza is a Catholic.
Okay. Well, first of all, I said my favorite apologist was.
I'm giving my buddy, my buddy Caleb a hard time.
Is he seriously a Catholic?
Yeah.
Gosh darn Dinesh, I gotta set him straight on that one, but.
Right. No, I was giving my buddy dry apologist a hard time.
You know what we say about Catholics here, Stellan, right?
I don't want to say it. You say it.
Because Dawkins writes on page 356 of the God Delusion, it's also worse to be raised Catholic than to actually be abused by a Catholic priest. So
Yeah, pretty bad. But I don't know. Honestly, I don't really like apologists as much as I like to follow a scholar. So that's why I quote Michael Heiser a lot, is because whenever I quote Michael Heiser, like people will like. I've never had anybody go, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like even whenever I was on the Scholar Fiction, I was having a debate with Scholar Fiction. Dr. Josh was like, "Oh yeah, I like Heiser," and Heiser, and he went into detail about how he liked Heiser, but then he wanted another secondary source, which I understood, and he said that's fine. But when I debated Jim Majors, I brought up Heiser to make a point, and Jim goes, "Well, I like Heiser, yeah, and I think Heiser's a good scholar." And it's like, I like to bring up a source that everybody can kind of look through and go.
I gotta say, I think James Major is like the Mike Winger of the atheist side, because they sort of they don't look alike, obviously, but I think they sort of sound alike and they sort of communicate the same way. Am I wrong about that, or is that just a subjective view I have?
I don't think so.
Like next time you watch Mike Winger, just imagine Jim Majors and see if there's any. See if my perception is good
Jim
at all.
Hey, look, I'm gonna tell you this about Jim. Jim's a bright guy. Like don't underestimate Jim, because here's the thing. Jim's I think he's in a doctorate program for theology, like right now. So like, I wasn't saying you're talking about like the aesthetic like of his voice and how he talks and everything, but like Jim is probably gonna be in the next couple of years. He's probably gonna be one of the like premier like top non-believers on YouTube to like debate, because he already knows a lot about the New Testament, and about textual criticism, for example. But and I like his method better, like where he like tries to go into verses and details instead of just like, well, what about the wars in the Old Testament? What about that? But I get what you're saying. I don't know. I guess I'd have to watch him with the Mike Winger goggles on to see if that's accurate.
Well, I wasn't using Mike Winger as an analogy to say that he's also not a good debater. I think Mike Winger is very intelligent. He obviously doesn't have a doctorate, or does he? Does he have he probably would have a master's and a bachelor's, Mike Winger, but I think Mike is very good on a lot of the stuff in the Bible and so on. He's not really on the philosophical side of things. I don't think that's his goal necessarily, but
yeah. Well, we've learned in this interview that Stillman's favorite apologist is a Catholic, and that he takes man's word.
Exactly.
Wait, you don't?
His favorite book is by Ben Shapiro. And
that one you got correct. Well, it's one of my favorite books.
All right. Any more brain busters?
Yes. Do you think Christian truth should be spread through apologetics?
Should it?
Going to flesh that up there.
Should it be spread through apologetics? That's a good question. I think because of the Christ saying things like, if you have ears to hear, listen, or my sheep hear my voice and things like this, I don't think there's a specific method that is more effective. But
I'm not saying the only way, but do you think it's going to be a almost one of a necessary ways in the lost generations coming up? Because statistics obviously show my generation and Generation Z are some of the most skeptical generations, or relativistic as well. So
yeah, I mean, I guess that's one way,
that's
right?
Just a relative opinion.
Yeah, first of all, that's relative. So, but I did understand your question, but what I was pointing out was that I don't think it matters the method. So, for example, Ben Arbour, I interviewed him on my channel. He's a PhD philosopher, like very bright guy. As good as he is at philosophy and as wise as he is and everything, he mentioned on the interview I had with him that it was a fire and brimstone preacher that kind of caught his attention at first and kind of convicted him. So that's interesting. He goes, I would never use that, and I don't promote that, He goes, but I got to admit, like, I was caught by it. And so I've had this conversation with Christians years ago that, like I've seen, for example, Jesse Morrell, who's a fire and brimstone hellfire preacher that preaches on college campuses like that. And I've seen him, have success with that method. So all I would say is that I don't think there's one specific method, right? But also I think that no matter the method, people who have ears to hear will hear, for example, like just to, So I don't think it necessarily matters, but I think that I like apologetics better. Or actually, I don't even do apologetics. I do counter apologetics to atheists. Because how, like, when you give a defense of Christianity, it's apologetic. But when atheists give a defense of atheism, it's counter apologetics.
I think you're practicing negative apologetics, which is responding to accusations and claims against God and Christianity, like the problem of evil would be one. Or when you went on the Scholar Fiction show, the apparent genocides and stuff in the Bible.
Yeah.
Responding to those claims. Then positive apologetics is just giving the case and so on, starting with, the classical approach. Or you can be the cumulative case approach where you obviously can't lay out every piece of evidence in one conversation, but you lay out multiple pieces of evidence.
Well, speak for yourself. Because I think obviously.
I am speaking for myself. because I'm a cultural cumulative case apologist, which I think there is obviously a piece of evidence for Christianity in almost every aspect of like aesthetics, philosophy, obviously logic, history, science, all that good stuff. And what I do with cultural apologetics, you find that person's starting point, their desirability, and what is keeping them from becoming a Christian, or maybe they want to be a Christian but they don't see this in Christianity, and you find that starting point and you open up the conversation like how Paul does in Acts 17 on Mars Hill. He quotes the Greek poets, and he obviously knows the culture around him, and he's bringing that up, and that interests them in listening to him. And then he goes into his sort of classical apologetics approach in Acts 17. So that's the type of apologist I am. Because I think there's obviously classical apologist isn't for everyone. Evidentialism, historical apologetics isn't for everyone. Presuppositional apologetics definitely is not for everyone. But sometimes it can be used. The more rationalism, presuppositional apologetics. But yeah, I think that there's some aspect of evidence for Christianity relevant to people's starting points. Where, like, for example, the emotional problem of evil. Obviously, if they're coming from it at that approach, and you don't want to give a philosophical deduction argument against any logical problem of evil or evidential problem of evil, you want to address it from a Christian perspective and saying, well, look, if God is all good, we would expect him to come down as human and suffer along with us to show that he actually cares and so on. And I think that would be a good cultural apologetic approach in that specific example. But then people may see a logical contradiction in God's nature because of the logical problem. Then you would give your negative approach at that point. But that's my view. You can critique it or ask me questions about it if you want.
Yeah. My only question is, like, you're using man's philosophy.
Yeah, exactly.
To justify your claims. And the Bible obviously says don't follow in pointless philosophy.
So, yeah, Colossians 2:8, right. Never addressed that before at all. I specifically avoid that.
Yeah, so I see that you pick and choose your Bible verses as well.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, it's not responsible of you to do that. So
yeah. It's very manipulative of me. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just say that it probably has something to do with you and Stillman being best friends and all.
Oh, sorry. I'm a lover of wisdom, lover of truth, and that's a false proposition that we're best friends.
Yeah.
We're pragmatic friends.
Your best friends, just like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind.
Yeah.
No,
our relationship is more like Kent Hovind and Mike Jones. If you ever saw that debate.
Kent Hovind and Mike Jones?
Yeah.
No, dude, I didn't know the rapper was doing debates or whatever. I thought he was just doing music.
Yeah, no, he's still doing debates. That's when I came up with my famous slogan for Kent Hovind. I don't know if you want to hear it or not, but it's my avoiding hermeneutics like taxes.
Yeah.
Well, whether the tax evasion thing is legit or not, I don't know, but it's just a funny slogan.
I would like to. You know what's funny is you saying that I was thinking, like, his claim where he goes, well, don't you think that if an 8-year-old that was reading the text would agree with what I'm saying about it? I would like to see a parallel argument made by ancient aliens about Ezekiel's wheels within wheels, and they just go, well, don't you think that an 8-year-old would come to my conclusion that it's a UFO? That's like, well, we got all the iconography proof that it's not what they're talking about, but I guess maybe an 8-year-old would consider that a UFO. Sure. I don't know where that gets you.
It just sounds like to me you're just taking man's word over God's word.
All right, well, I mean, there's more of man's word out there, so at some point. Well, here's a good question, though, that I'd like to talk to you guys about. Because people, okay, so for the first time years, like maybe 4 years ago, me and Skylar had a debate when he was still a DS, and he said, "Well, you believe in objective morals, so like," and then he was like, "So like I don't see how everything could be objective." And I pointed out to him that no, I don't think everything ever is objective, just that there are some objective morals, right? And I just wanted to like see from y'all's perspective, like you guys y'all agree with that? Like not everything's objective, just that, but there are some objective morals, right? Or do you think that everything ever is objective?
I'm just an anti-nihilist moral realist, or anti-realist. No, I think there are clearly, I find it very suspicious if one is a Christian, like a moral nihilist or something like that. But I definitely hold that there are things that are true propositions and are clearly moral facts and wrong to do. Like the most clear example is murdering someone who's innocent. Or my position would be executing people who are innocent and you would know it. I mean, that's clearly something that's morally reprehensible. But there's also other things as well. But I think there are some, like I think a lot of the stuff in the Old Testament, like the civil laws, I think those are sort of subjective. Because obviously today, like in Eastern culture, like that it wouldn't matter to middle class and Western culture. So yeah, I think there's both. Not my distinction, but Augustine's distinction. You have the eternal law, which would be like the Ten Commandments and stuff like that, and then the temporal law, which are these sort of laws that are based in society that are objective for them because that's their culture and that's what they need to get along and get through, which resembles some of the eternal law, but at the same time, it's almost like their temporal law is how they practice the eternal law sometimes. So those would be distinctions I would make, if that makes any sense. Or am I just ranting and taking man's word over God's?
Yeah, so I usually give an example like, sure, but like when I'm remodeling my house, do I spend the extra money on a nicer dishwasher, or do I give that money to charity and buy the cheapest one? Like if I buy the more expensive one, I don't think it's objectively morally wrong that I did that, right? So I use examples like that are kind of trivial that go like, well, sure, not everything ever is objective, but I'm just saying there are some things that are objective. And so I just figured you probably agree with that. I'm sure like with the Old Testament, for example, Christ said, Moses gave you that law because of the hardness of your heart. So I'm sure you guys probably aren't that familiar with my argument from slavery in the Old Testament, but I use that a lot. So of Christ saying like, hey, you've heard it, an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, right? But I tell you this. And so I would definitely say that there were laws that were given because God was trying to shape a barbaric people into a certain way, for example. So I agree with you on that. What about you, Steelman?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Frank Turek points out that he says if only one thing is objectively evil, for example, torturing babies for fun, then God exists. So you don't need all things to be absolute.
Or raising your child Catholic.
Yeah, or raising your child Catholic.
Yeah. Or like Dinesh D'Souza being your favorite apologist because he's Catholic, obviously.
Anything with, that. I was listening to this podcast Mike Jones uploaded that he was interviewed by this Catholic, and dude, if he represents Roman Catholicism accurate, it's literally a cult. Like, sorry, any Catholics in the chat, but I don't think you would be as consistent with him. But the way he was just describing his religious epistemology, these hypothetical questions he was asking Mike. And this was the first time I ever listened Mike rip into someone before. Like, he's usually a calm dude, but he didn't, flip out, but he, just laid the facts on him in sort of in an aggressive manner, which I didn't, disagree with why he would do that. This guy was sort of being, the man's word over God's word type person. But
yeah. Well, while we're on Mike Jones on that topic of IP, I got to tell you guys, one day I was on and I've seen something that y'all were doing, and it kind of like, I don't know, it kind of like rubbed me the wrong way a little bit, because it was like y'all were doing the memes with Mike Jones, like taking man's word over God's word or whatever.
Yeah.
And like,
if you're offended by the meme, Stillman made it, not me. So
yeah, no, but it wasn't like, it's like I didn't take it as a joke. Like I thought you guys were being serious about it, and the only thing that because it made me think of the Calvinist Arminian memes that had went around for so long, where Calvinists kept putting out these memes where it's like God on the other side of the door just waiting like this for a man to knock, and he's just like, when's he ever gonna knock, and things like that. And I always hated when they were posting these Calvinist memes like that were just caricatures of the arguments from the other side. And but anyway, I gotta admit, like when I first seen that, I thought that it was like I thought that you guys were like trying to make some type of like serious point, like
heresy, destroy it. Mm-hmm. General Zod, famous words.
No, it's just we really hope Mike sees it and gets a chuckle.
No, he probably didn't. He just ignored it. He didn't even acknowledge the meme you did when I posted on my social media, and you did too.
No, he completely ignored it.
I have probably like 4 or 5 troll videos of him.
So how many subs do you think I'll pick up off this interview?
How many did you have beforehand?
I don't know.
Last time I checked, you had 107.
No, I at least had 109.
Oh, 109 then.
Or yeah, something like that.
You'll probably have more than Stillman in a few months, but
you know what?
No, buddy.
What? What, Stillman?
What?
You're up to 114.
There we go. Good. This is a solid team. Yeah, but I'm planning on quitting my job and just YouTube. And
it takes a while, like to start making money.
Right now.
Oh, right now, just quitting.
Next week, because I can see it coming. That's so funny, man. I heard a guy talking about that. He's like, "Yeah, well, I've got 385 subs on YouTube, and I'm considering quitting my job or whatever, and just like doing this for a living, because you could make thousands on YouTube." And I'm like, I'm just nodding my head like, sure, I understand. Like some people's goals, like you should definitely have short-term goals and long-term goals, right? But even if I had 400,000 subs, I probably wouldn't quit my day job.
I probably would, but if I was PewDiePie, I would honestly quit my day job.
But he's got like what, 25 million or something.
90, almost. I think he's over 100 million now, because last year the meme was T-Series versus PewDiePie. PewDiePie has way better content. They just upload like 1,000 videos a day with only like 50,000 views, maybe max 500,000, while each of his videos have an average of 5 million. But he's not the best influence, but some of his meme videos are sort of funny. Anyway, we've been doing this for like 2 hours and a half now. So, do you have any last requests?
Any last words?
Exactly.
Jeez.
Any last meal requests?
Right. No, I do got to get going because I'm moving out of my house. I just bought a 12-foot enclosed trailer yesterday, and I actually got a lot of stuff. I'm moving a lot of my books and things upstairs, and I got a lot of other stuff to move out of my garage. So, and it's I'm on the East Coast, so it's 12:30 here, and so no, I'm just dying to get over this interview and get done with it.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just kidding. No, I enjoy talking with you guys, and just keep taking man's word over God's word every day, and make the world a better place.
Middle easterly quadrant coast, so it's about 12.
I'm in a Universe C27. So our time and space works differently here. I just made my own device I can communicate with you guys.
Oh wow, I thought that was G14 classified.
Yeah. Oh, did you get my reference from before when I was like this C17 classified?
Yeah. You from Rush Hour?
Yes.
No, it's actually G14.
Oh, it's G14.
Yeah.
Now
I'm
you
just like my
an
father.
idiot.
I'm horrible. I butcher movie quotes so bad.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I appreciate everybody in the chat. Definitely hit that like button and that subscribe button to JMD Apologetics and Stillman. Definitely give Stillman a thumbs up on any of his videos, even if they're not good. And
that's an important disclaimer because none of them are good. So, but you should give me, unless I have a good guest. Those are the good ones.
All right.
So someone asks, where did my mustache go? It's growing back, but it went away just like how IP took away God's word and started taking man's word over God's. So
mustaches are racist anyway. So
yeah, especially when people literally make memes of me, like I'm sure Stelman's probably doing right now. But
yeah, I imagine you with the mustache. You're like Mario Andretti.
Well, if you saw, I uploaded on Facebook without even thinking about it. This one mugshot with these aviators I bought, and my mustache ruined it. I was just like, oh, I need a shave. And my profile pic is much better.
Yeah, well,
still,
I used to have like a super long beard. My beard used to be like
Duck Dynasty.
Yeah, but then I wanted to stop making up for the loss of brain cells, and so I trimmed it.
Would it be copyright from Scholar Fiction if I said subscribe and make the world a better place?
Yes.
Demonetized.
Well, and then again, he uses movie clips in most of his intros.
Anybody got any super chats? Let's get a super chat going.
No, unfortunately not, because we don't take man's word over God's word.
Super chats when we're on John's channel. If we were on my channel, I'd say yes, all the super chats.
But you can't super chat on your channel because you're under 1,000 and under 4,000 watch hours.
You know what?
Yeah.
What? What are you gonna do about it, huh?
I'll tell you off air because I can't say.
Stowen, why don't you show everyone your haircut?
No. I'll show you guys next time.
Actually, I think I just seen a super chat come in.
Geez, I wonder who from. Hopefully it's not someone who takes man's word over God's word, or I have to reject it. Well, no, I'll just take your money anyway and call you a heretic, like the Catholic Church does. But no,
it's a Catholic, I think, actually.
Any I don't think I have too many Catholic viewers, but for those of my friends who are Catholic, I obviously joke around, but I do find some serious problems with it after listening to this one podcast.
Do you do debates at all?
Huh?
Do you do debates at all?
I did one with an open theist. I felt I needed to do. Like, it was like 2 weeks, 3 weeks notice, and I sort of procrastinated because that's how I am by nature. And I have school going on, but during the summer I want to do some more stuff.
Yeah.
I have like
you send me a paper and you're like, hey, can you correct this real quick? I have to submit it in 5 minutes.
Yeah. That was a long way to say you're scared of debates.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Because I'll make videos. And
did my super chat go through? Maybe I can do super chats on my computer. I don't think
I always do my super chats from my computer. I never can figure out how to do it through the phone.
Yeah, but I got a crappy computer, so.
Is it a MacBook?
No, it's an HP laptop, and it's fairly new. It's not Did we already stop streaming? Why can't I get the live chat back up?
No, it's still going through.
No, I'm just messing with you.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why it didn't go through, but I sent you $2. Maybe it'll show up later.
Maybe.
And the caption was "man's word."
JMD approved.
There you go. And shouts out to Dry Apologist, the only Catholic that was in the chat tonight.
Well, he seems more reasonable. I think. Reasonable. Yeah, I gotta say I don't like his view of progressive revelation, but yeah, I think he admitted that that's very controversial.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of it, but either way, Caleb's a bright guy. Got he's debated a lot of atheists on YouTube, and I think that he's definitely a good contender for our side. But again, sometimes I like to have you guys seen the James White Catholic speech that he gave recently in London at that church?
I have.
You did?
I haven't.
Oh, you haven't? He really ripped into him pretty good, and basically he was saying like it's a hard time to be a Catholic apologist right now.
And it's worse to raise your kids Catholic than any other moral abomination.
Sure. Well, I thought that went without saying, but
I mean, obviously the Catholic Church is behind some goods, but I think it's ultimately Christianity behind those goods. But I think Catholics can be Christians, but I don't think Catholicism necessarily is Christianity. So, but yeah, enough with controversial statements. Do you have any last minute thoughts, Stelman? Because I know you have to get going.
Yeah. So, did a Luke do?
That's not all, folks, because I still have to plug some stuff. Thank you for watching, everyone. Definitely leave a like, subscribe, and share. And also, we can always use as much support as possible. So there's a Patreon, JMD Apologetics 101. And consider helping Stelman because he really helps out the channel as well. Go to his subscribe star at the Unapologetic Apologists. Always have to get the S in there. Otherwise, he'll flip out, even if it's one person. It always seems like to me, but yeah, so thank you all for watching. Any last minute thoughts or words before I end the stream? Last nod. So that's a form of communication. Yeah, you did that before. I'm pretty sure that live stream got demonetized, but Okay. Christian truth needs to be spread through apology.
I wish to be demonetized.
I hope you get demonetized, even though you're not monetized. But yeah, okay. Enough from it's 12:40. Christian truth needs to be spread through apologetics, and have a good night.